Good morning, everyone. The General Scrutiny Committee meeting being held on Monday, the 21st of March 2022. My name is Jonathan Lester and I am the chairman of the meeting. I'll be chairing today's meeting. Before we start the meeting, though, we have to consider the fire and emergency evacuation procedures. So for those present in the room, if the fire alarm sounds, please leave the building by the nearest exit and make your way to the fire assembly point in the car park. The agenda papers and other relevant information for this meeting are available for viewing on Herefordshire Council's website. The Council is streaming this meeting live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel and is making a recording. To ensure that recording quality is maintained, please speak as clearly as possible and keep background noise to a minimum. Please ensure that all of your devices are set to silent. Others are permitted to film, photograph and record public meetings, provided that it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. If there are any members of the public present who do not wish to be filmed or photographed during the meeting, please make sure you raise your hand so that any making such recordings will be aware of that. Only committee members present in the meeting room may vote. For those people in attendance virtually, may I request that you use the raise hand function within the system when you want to contribute. So we have a number of people attending today's meeting. Councillor Wilding, who is a committee member, cannot attend the meeting physically, so he's tuning in via Zoom. So Councillor Wilding, welcome to the meeting via Zoom. You're very welcome as always, and we look forward to your contributions as part of this committee. However, because you're not in the room, you won't be able to vote, but Councillor Wilding is fully aware of that. Thank you. We have officers in attendance who will be helping us with the proceedings of the meeting, and we're also joined by the Cabinet member responsible for planning, that's Councillor Harvey as well, so thank you for your attendance via Zoom. So first off we go to, before I start actually, just like to make a note that Michael Carr is joining us via Zoom. Just waving to us there. Hello, welcome Michael, you're very welcome. Michael is the new interim scrutiny officer. So Michael's worked for a range of local authorities within a scrutiny capacity, so he'll be leading the development of the new scrutiny system, and so is attending this meeting, I'm sure, as an observer and keen to see how the scrutiny process will proceed today. So we welcome you, and please feel free to make any contributions as we go through the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, so we go to the first item on the agenda, which is apologies for absence. We've noted that Councillor Wilding sends his apologies in terms of attending the physical meeting, but he's joining us via Zoom, and we have no other apologies. Therefore, we do not need any other substitutes, which is the next item on the agenda. Agenda item 3, which is declarations of interests. Do any members wish to declare a Schedule 1 or Schedule 2 or any other interest in today's item? None, thank you very much. We now go to the minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of January, which is included in the agenda item as pages 11 to 18 for approval. I move from the chair that that's a correct account of the meeting. Do I have a seconder? Okay, Councillor Bowen seconds. All in favour? Any against? One abstention because Councillor Bowes was unable to attend. Okay, thank you. So they are approved. Right. Agenda item 5, questions from members of the public. No questions have been received from members of the public. And again, item 6, which is questions from councillors, we have no questions that have been removed from members of the council. Right, okay then, well we'll go straight on to the substantive item on the agenda, which is the update on the planning service. We have a brief introduction from Ross Cook, who's the new Corporate Director for Economy and Environment, and then we will be having a presentation by Florence Churchill, who's the Interim Manager for the Regulatory Services that specifically delivers planning, and then we will have an update from Justine Burnett, who's the Portfolio Manager for the 106 function for Council. But before we kick off with officers, because Councillor Harvey, it's your corporate cabinet responsibility, would you like to make any introductory comments, or would you like to speak later on in the meeting?
I'll just say a few words, Chairman, if I may, and then hand over to officers. First of all, I'd like to repeat my apology that we haven't got formal reports for you here, and that won't happen again. But I'd just like to say that this administration came into office in 2019 with a core strategy which was seriously out of shape after failing at any point to deliver on the land supply required, and the county was facing a storm of predatory unplanned development. No minerals and waste policies were in place other than those saved from the 2007 Unitary Development Plan. We had chronic pollution of our river systems by agricultural practices and water companies failing to invest appropriately in pipeline and processing infrastructure. Serious pinch points in our electricity grid, significant inflated risk of flooding due to climate change, unnecessary, undeliverable and unaffordable infrastructure projects, and a vacuum of leadership and strategic thinking. It's taken a considerable time to make the necessary management and policy changes to begin to turn things around. And this has had to take place during a series of unprecedented flooding events and through a national pandemic, which has impacted on staff deployment, immediate priorities, workload and working practices in the planning team. Bringing in experienced officers as interims has provided leadership and direction and has started an acceleration of the change and transformation process. But we probably have at least another year of hard work ahead of us to get the service to where it needs to be to deliver to the professional standards and ambitions that we all have for this service. I welcome the Scrutiny Committee's interest in the planning service, and I look forward to this scrutiny meeting and to continued interest as we continue on the transformation journey.
Thank you. Now we go to Ross Cook.
Thank you, Chair. Members, good morning to you all. So firstly, thank you for your invitation and welcome this morning. As you said, Chair, it's week 6 for me into the role, so still getting my way around both the organisation and the county, which has all been very positive so far. Really welcome your overview of this service today. As I said, fairly new into the post, so it's given me an opportunity to both review the audit and review of the service that was carried out a few months ago, and obviously the action plan that's now in place, and we will update you on that going forward. Thank Councillor Harvey for her introduction as well. As she's mentioned, there are a number of key documents that we're currently reviewing, which is the core strategy, but also on top of that we're looking at the economic plans that we need to put in place, but also the city centre master plan. So a number of key policies and strategies that we're coming forward over the coming months that will all then feed into the final adoption of the core strategy that no doubt members will be reviewing in the coming months. Again, I'd like to reiterate the apologies for the reports not being issued on time. Clearly we want members to have a proper opportunity to review the presentation of the information before you, and I appreciate that because that was late you didn't get the full opportunity to review the background papers and we will ensure that doesn't happen again. As you said, Chair, in your introductions, Flo Churchill was the Interim Service Director for this area. We'll go through a presentation, and with your permission, we'll go through that in detail and then take questions at the end. But also, as you said, Justine is with us as well, just to provide any additional information that you might want on the current review of the 106 agreements and the process for that. So rather than use up any more of your time, Chair, if you're happy, we'll move over to Flo and she'll go through the presentation in detail.
Yes, please do so.
Councillors, thank you all for your presence, your indulgence this morning. I'm going to share my screen. Can you all now see the presentation?
I think it's probably easier.
Yep.
Can everybody see the presentation?
Yep.
Yeah, brilliant. So if we start, because this is a very quick run through, an update on the improvements that we've made since the PAS review and the future changes that are coming forward. So we had a peer review in November, December 2020 carried out by the Planning Advisory Service in conjunction with the Local Government Association. The review found that the then new administration needed to take ownership of the local plan and have confidence in the evidence base and environmental credentials of both policies and planning decisions. The review also found that there were opportunities to build strong links between the county plan and the operation of the Development Management Service. The review recommended that the Planning Service develop a vision and that there may need to be a management review to help deliver that vision. The review also commented that the trust between members and officers needed to improve. The review went on to make a number of short and medium-term recommendations. The short-term recommendations centred around the need to develop a local plan review timetable, to co-develop a whole planning service mission statement, to ensure the corporate review of member officer working includes reviews of the expectations, role clarity and improving cultural behaviours, to assign the 5-year housing land supply risk and oversight of mitigation measures to a nominated officer, to develop an enforcement action plan working with members to agree priorities, to ensure regular training for members and officers, and to review processes to identify efficiencies, and to look to develop a programme for officer development with a focus on investigatory skills. And finally, some proactive work on top priority cases with relentless communication. So those were the short-term recommendations. There were then a number of medium-term recommendations, which looked to review the structure of the planning service, to review the overall planning work programme, resources and budget, to review development management procedures to focus on managing demand, efficiencies and budget, to review the approach to pre-decision Section 106 agreements to consider whether case officers should retain responsibility for all pre-decision input, to review the member training programme and involve members in planning it, deliver shorter sessions and use independent facilitators where this would add value, and to review ward member and public speaking time limits at committee and the length of officer reports, and also to consider introducing a chair's briefing meeting prior to committee day with wider input from members. So if we have a quick look at the planning service metrics, in the year ending to September 2021, we received 2,313 applications, which represents 6.3% of those received nationally and less than 0.5% of the national total. We only had one decision that had an environmental statement with it. We had 1,085 decisions where an extension of time agreement was made. And in total, 1,909 decisions were made. Of those, 98 decisions were delegated to officers, and that is above the national average. 1,723 total decisions were granted, which is about 5.5% of the regional total. 90% of all decisions were granted. The average regional percentage is 91, it's 88%. So we are below the regional average, above the national average. There were no decisions in principle on or any technical details consents. And of the 12 applications for prior approval for permitted development, 7 prior approval applications weren't actually required, 3 were granted and 2 were refused. With regard to enforcement, we issued 52 stop notices, which is 17% of the regional total and 1.5% of the national total. And we issued 20 planning contravention notices. 7.5% of the regional and 0.5% of the national total. So those are the metrics about what your planning service had achieved in the year ending September 2021. The current issues we're dealing with in the planning service is, first and foremost, the perception of service quality issues, the delays due to the backlog and COVID pressures, the local plan timetable, the understanding of the enforcement approach, the fall in planning application fee income, and Section 106 spending priorities and associated issues. So in terms of looking at Section 106 and looking in particular at training and other aspects of that, there is further training on Section 106 issues being arranged for April this year. Council will be providing the training supported by officers in the planning service. So this is as a direct result of one of the recommendations of the PAS review in terms of getting some independent facilitators. The government, I think it's important that members know that the government has indicated there are likely to be significant changes to the whole developer contribution regime, and that significant changes to both Section 106 and community infrastructure levies should be anticipated. When those further changes are announced, there will be further training provided to ensure that members have the most up-to-date information and understanding. And there is a fundamental review of current and historic Section 106 agreements being undertaken by the Programme Management Office, and this will be reported to members. So if we look at planning policy, the local plan needs to be owned by the members, which is what the review said. The 5-year housing land supply issue has improved. The latest housing delivery tests results show that the council has provided 103% of the amount of housing needed over the last 3 years, so since 2019. The local plan will need to take into account the changes arising from the Environment Act, especially biodiversity net gain and nature recovery strategies, and those changes are fundamental to the duties and responsibilities of the council. In terms of development management, the planning backlog is being dealt with by the appointment of a team of development management planning officers, with a resultant decrease in the backlog to just over 100 applications from 372. The development of a mission statement for planning will help to focus the development management service team to look at how the services have been provided and what has led to the perception of the service that's failing to perform. The mission statement will also look to clarify the contribution that development management makes to the overall aims and objectives of the council, particularly with regards to climate change and net zero ambitions. The development of a communications protocol would outline how and when member inquiries and issues will be prioritised and approached by officers. And we are looking to develop a more formal approach to pre-application advice, which will highlight a balanced professional judgment as well as consultee responses. We're also looking to develop a system of template planning performance agreements for more complex applications. And we're considering a soft launch of planning performance agreements with a major application to test how this service improves the consideration of such applications. In looking at enforcement, work is currently underway to produce an enforcement local plan as per the requirements of the NPPF. This will be produced in consultation with members and will set out the priorities for the way in which enforcement is carried out. The enforcement local plan will prioritise different categories of alleged breaches and will provide a timescale for dealing with those issues. And further training will be provided to members to ensure that you have the most up-to-date information and knowledge about how enforcement operates within the current statutory framework, and indeed any changes to that framework as it happens. In terms of planning committee, the peer review made several suggestions about the planning committee, and that will be looked at as part of the ongoing Rethinking Governance review to see if the changes suggested can be accommodated. The format of officer reports is under review, and the changes will be implemented to ensure that reports are precise and concise. In order to aid the recovery of the planning service, we have added that additional planning capacity to deal with the backlog. The backlog has decreased to just over 100 from 372. A review of the way in which the service is structured is under active consideration at the moment. If we look at the proposed training programme for member training, we're looking at providing training on local plan inquiries, the Environment Act of 2021, which gained assent in November last year, biodiversity net gain, which arose out of the Environment Act, phosphate credits and the whole phosphate issue, material considerations and what things members should be taking into account when coming to decisions on planning applications, and predisposition, predetermination. In terms of officer training, We're looking at investigatory skills, particularly focused on our enforcement team, presentation skills for all officers, the Environment Act, the Biodiversity Net Gain, phosphate credits, and continuing professional development for officers. So the next steps we're looking to undertake is to produce a draft local enforcement plan for member endorsement, to complete the review of the structure of the planning service, and to report to the next scrutiny committee on a proposed new structure for that planning service. In addition, the planning inspectorate have agreed to send someone to attend virtually the next meeting to talk about the work of the inspectorate, planning appeals, and related issues. So that's the end of the presentation.
Thank you very much. Right, okay. Well, I think we'll start with the committee, and someone's got their hand up already. Councillor Summers, would you like to ask the first question?
Well, thank you, Chair. I noticed that there's training for members. Now that training would be great if we were communicated with on half of our planning applications. We too often get awaiting allocation, and then suddenly we get something telling us there's been refusal or there's not been a refusal, and if we want to press the issue we can go through the process, which is, to me is kind of ridiculous. And from 2015 things were very much easier as far as I can find out. It was for me because I had input in a lot of the applications that I was dealing with. Now I don't get any. So perhaps if there was more communication between officers, perhaps we wouldn't be in the position we're in. Thank you. I know it wasn't a question, but it was a statement.
Okay, just warming up the committee for us. Right, Councillor Bowes and then Councillor Bowen.
Thank you. Excuse me, thank you. I agree, improving cultural behaviours and communication is a massive issue in this council, not just in planning but across the board in my opinion. So this is a question to Florence. I believe you've been in place since November as Director of Planning and Economy. So what's been your challenges since you've arrived, and what changes have you managed to introduce in your first 100 days?
Thank you for the question. I joined the council at the end of November, and one of the first issues that became apparent is the issue relating to communication. Officers are not providing the level of service that you as members have a right to expect in terms of communicating in time and in full. So this is one of the issues that we are tackling across the board in the planning service. The other big issue relates to the planning backlog, where we had a backlog of nearly 400 applications which had been validated but awaiting allocation to case officers. So what I was able to do was to gather a cohort of planning officers who are very well experienced and who have been dealing with these applications on a remote basis, who've managed to reduce the backlog to just over 100 from 372. So that is making a very important improvement in the way that the service is provided to, in particular to applicants, because quite rightly applicants were becoming very frustrated with having their applications validated and not allocated and processed through the process. As an authority, we continue to determine a lot of the applications under delegated powers, which is in line with current government guidance. I think we do need to look at the call-in procedures and the redirection procedures so that members feel they do have ownership. I think it's very important that we provide that service properly to members. The other aspect that I've been working on in conjunction with Ross since he started is looking at the structure of the service, and we are looking to bring a report back to the Scrutiny Committee fairly soon about the way that the service is structured. The service needs to be restructured in order to A, achieve the service improvements that we are very well aware of are needed, and B, to make the service, put the service in the best position to deal with the changes that are coming forward through the planning system. We are all aware of those changes which had been anticipated as part of the planning bill. The planning bill's now been is completely dead in the water. and we're anticipating that the changes to the planning system can come forward through the levelling update bill. So we're keeping a very close eye on that. The other biggest issue is Section 106 and the way that we deal with Section 106, the way that priorities are assigned, the way that we report on Section 106. And I think that is an issue that this is why we've got Justine here to talk about it as well. We are carrying out that fundamental review, but I do need to place the caveat in front of members that Section 106 and other developer contributions such as SIL are likely to change massively by the government. I did sit on a working panel at the department when we were looking at how Section 106 and other developer contributions should change, and I suspect there are going to be some radical reforms. We will keep you up to date as quickly as we can. We'll make you up to date as quickly as we can on that.
Can I just come back on the 106?
Yes, we'll go to Councillor Bowen in a second, but Councillor Bowes just wants to come back on that 106, if you don't mind, Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm always confused why the negotiation and the spending of Section 106 money just seems to be shrouded in mystery. I don't understand why members and the public can't see clearly in one place where the 106 agreement contributions have been agreed. So I'd like to suggest a recommendation, if possible, Chair, a detailed report on the historic handling and recommended future management of the entire 106 process be brought back to committee within 3 months, because I still have lots of questions.
Okay, and I think Councillor Bowes, that's a record for us. Within 30 minutes of the meeting, we've got our first recommendation. So
It's not our first, I've given some already.
oh right, okay. Well, during the meeting. Excellent. Right. Thank you for that. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Communications, I think, are an essential element of any work with the council, but at the moment in the planning system, I think they are very deficient indeed. I have been ringing up one particular planning officer for nearly the last 3 weeks on a daily basis and have still not received a reply. That, I think, is not quite good enough. And that wouldn't be the only time that we've had long delays between ringing or emailing and getting some sort of response. It is very frustrating and damaging, I think, to the credibility of planning, let alone to the credibility of councillors, who keep telling their parish councils, yes, we are dealing with this, we are doing our best, and we are not helped at all when we do not get responses from the planning department. Not everybody is at fault, but there are too many, I think, where the response to councillors is tardy, to put it mildly, and sometimes non-existent. That is not good enough. Enforcement also, I think, as I'm sure you all probably agree with me, has been patchy and in some cases feeble. Too often you hear it is not expedient to enforce. Well, why were the conditions put there in the first place then if we weren't going to enforce them? It does seem a very strange way of going on. And I do think we need some more teeth. At the moment, the enforcement bulldog has rubber teeth. And that's not good, I think. Very bad for the reputation of the council. People see they can get away with all sorts of murderous deviations from what they're allowed to do. And that's, I think, wrong again. If they come back to change a condition or whatever, let them come back. But let's see it done properly and in the open. It's very, very poor, I think, at the moment. Perhaps not universally, but certainly in my experience, some of it has been very, very shoddy. And I'm disappointed with that. Section 106, as Councillor Bowes has said, it has been a nightmare, I think, in many cases. And you will find parish councils in particular keep on asking, what's happened to their money? Can we use it, please? And not have it as the personal treasure chest of the council, which apparently it seems to be at the moment, or appears to be. I'm not saying it is, but it gives that impression sometimes, and that's also very unfortunate. And it's a shame this money isn't used as soon as possible to do the good it was designed to do. It shouldn't be waiting around for years and years until we come to the 10-year point where it can be given back to the developers. It should be used expeditiously, I think, and very practically. And as far as reforming the whole system goes, remember the old adage, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. It's all too easy to throw everything out, toss it up in the air and see what comes down. But remember, there's some good bits to our planning system now, and some very good officers as well need encouragement. And let us make the best of what we have and, well, dispose of the dross, but make sure we keep the good stuff, please. Thank you.
I see, Flo, you've got your hand up. Did you want to come back on some of the points that Councillor Bowen has just raised? Was that?
Yes, please, if I could.
Yes, please do.
Councillor Bowen, I take on board entirely what you're saying about the communication about Section 106 and the need for a very succinct summary of matters, or detailed summary of matters. We do publish what's known as an infrastructure funding report each year, which reports on Section 106 monies gathered, what it's been assigned to, how it's been spent, how much has been given back, how much is in the pot, etc. And that is a legal requirement for us to publish each December. So there are reports on that published each December, and I am quite happy to send members the copy of the most recent report in that regard. I take on board again the comments that were made about communication, which is why I have suggested we need a protocol that officers need to adhere to in terms of responding to member inquiries and voicemails and telephone messages. Also, we hear what you're saying about enforcement. Our enforcement service does operate within the current legal framework that it has to, and as a discretionary service as well, which is a point that I don't know if members are aware of, that the National Planning Policy Framework says that enforcement is a discretionary service, not that that is any excuse for us providing a poor service. In producing the enforcement local plan, that will clearly set out priorities for enforcement action and the timescale attached to each of those priorities. And finally, I'd like to say thank you for the acknowledgement that we do have some good officers. We do have some good officers in the service who are very dedicated public servants, and we will not be throwing out any babies in the bathwater.
Right, I have Councillor Durkin, and then I note that Councillor Wilding is wanting to ask a question as well, and Councillor Stark, so thank you. Flo, can I just come back on a really important point? And it's not, I think it's not meant to deceive anyone. It's not meant to say things, trying to paint a different picture. But planning enforcement is not discretionary. Whether you take action after the matter's been investigated is discretionary. And so we have to be very careful when we say, oh, enforcement is a discretionary service. There's the duty to investigate, and an authority will find themselves subject to ombudsman action if they don't. So I think we have to be very careful. And if you look at paragraph 59 of the NPPF, it says enforcement action is discretionary. So I just want to make sure in members' minds that we have to be very careful there. And if it's deemed that it's not expedient to do anything, that's the decision of the council to make. But they can only make that decision once they've actually investigated. So I'm just like to make that clarification. Right, Councillor Durkin.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a brief aside before I ask my question. I think it's essential, and I thank you for clarifying the part about enforcement. I'm disappointed that this is not more widely known by the sound of it. We must have an enforcement section that is effective. We must. And I appreciate that the expeditiousness of anything is a frustration. It's been a frustration for me in the past. But my concern is that we do things properly. If there's an enforcement to be had, we must investigate. As I say, I'm disappointed it's not universally recognised. Right, my question, thank you, Chairman. I'm looking at the reduction from 372 to 100, very laudable. But my concern is, what is the additional cost been placed on the burden on the planning committee, on the planning service that is already underfunded, under pressure, maybe not underfunded, but under pressure with their finances. I mean, in particular, what was the cost of the recruitment of these consultants? What is the ongoing cost of this, of these planning recovery consultants? And what has been the cost of the provision of an interim director up to the appointment of the current director and the leaving of the previous director? All these associated costs are important because they add an additional pressure on funding that perhaps isn't fully there. So my question, Chairman, is I would like the committee to have a full update on all the additional spending that's been carried out between 2019 to now with regard to the additional cost put by getting to the situation where we are now with 100 outstanding applications to be determined. Thank you, Chairman. That's a request for a...
Is that a recommendation?
A recommendation, thank you, yes.
Okay, right. Thank you. Councillor Wilding.
Thank you, Chair. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Loud and clear.
Good. Just going back to enforcement. How can we improve enforcement? That's what I'm wondering. I mean, at the moment in my ward, we have a situation where a developer who's made several developments and making more applications, but has been found to not be compliant on previous applications, and yet they're allowed to continue making new applications, making promises involved in those applications, which they haven't been compliant with in previous applications. And it seems to me, why can we not use, I know somebody's going to come back and say it's legally not allowed. Why can we not change it so that it is allowed? Because it would seem to me if you want teeth to really have a snap and bite at some developers, you could tell them, if you don't get it right on previous applications, we're not going to let you do another one. It seems an obvious way to do it. It wouldn't involve much effort, I'd have thought. But anyway, so that's the question. How can we get proper teeth, and why can't we use a situation like that? Thanks.
Claire, sorry, you've got your hand up. Is there a specific, you're coming back to Councillor Wilding's point?
Yes, please, if I could.
Yeah, sure.
On enforcement. I think enforcement is a very difficult issue, and the specific issues you mentioned about applicants' behaviour is actually the subject of a private members' bill that's currently at the second reading stage in the House of Commons. And I can send you the committee members details of that private members' bill that looks to create such a thing as a register of repeat offenders enforcement action, more penalties attached to it, creating criminal offences relating to enforcement and lack of enforcement, lack of alleged breaches and so on and so forth. So there is the potential for a private members' bill to come forward that actually looks at these issues. And I wasn't sure if members would have been aware of that.
That's really helpful. Councillor Stark.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Flo, for the additional information. Can I look at capacity of the service, please? I mean, I know you're talking about restructuring. I know you've taken us through the firefighting that's going on at the moment to reduce the backlog. What I can't get my head around is whether anyone within the council has looked at the applications that have come in over the last few years and mapped that against the number of resources we've got and looked at the actual capacity. Now, I understand, Flo, you are looking at restructuring, and that may actually help in terms of perhaps changing the capacity that's required in terms of resources to meet that demand. But everybody knows that managing a demand-led service is notoriously difficult because we've not got control of it. We're having to respond to whatever the level of applications come in. So I'm concerned around capacity, but even looking at the medium-term recommendations, I wasn't really getting a feel for that. I know you're looking at restructuring, I know you've talked about firefighting, but do we really have a handle on what size of service we need in this council to be able to cope with the range and level of applications that we have had over the last number of years? That's my first point. My second point is around quality assurance. What are the arrangements for quality assurance when an officer writes a report that is going to planning committee? Is that looked at by a senior planning officer or not? So quality assurance is an issue for me, because if we're going to get to the point where we accept that reports are consistent in their approach across the county, because one of the key things with planning is equity and consistent of approach, and that we don't open ourselves to claims that, oh, you gave them approval but you haven't given us approval. So I'm interested in this quality assurance aspect as well. Chair, I've already asked Ben to have a recommendation on capacity, because I don't think that's been answered yet, although I'll be interested to see what Flo's got to say. But I'm also interested in this quality assurance point as well, and that may emerge as a recommendation depending on what Flo might say. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Stark, I think that's about the quality assurance, it's a really important point, because as we all know as members, we have planning applications that members of the public come to us, and I was just told just the other day that a planning application perhaps should be approved because they did a similar approach in Leinster, and we should be applying that approach elsewhere for the sake of consistency. And I'm thinking, well, who was sense checking that we weren't being consistent in the first place? So I think that's an excellent point that I would really like to see as a recommendation.
But capacity isn't.
Oh, also capacity, but in terms of sense checking, are we being consistent? Because, you know, a lot of the time, agents are working right across the county, and if they get one result in one place, they will naturally want to expect it in another part of the county. And if there's not that consistency, then that will.
Or even more pernicious, they may exploit a particular decision in another application that we might not want repeated. It's just a thought, Chair.
No, excellent. Councillor Wilding, you had your hand up. Was that in response to your previous comments, or will you come again in a bit?
Thanks, Chair. No, I've taken it down now. I'll come back when I've got another question.
Okay, thank you. Just checking. Councillor Durkin.
Thank you, Chair. Going off on what Councillor Stark has said, there seems to me to have been some sort of freeze on recruitment of planning officers over the last few years, which has attempted, I think, to reduce the impact, financial costs to the service. What was the plan to reduce costs over the last few years with regard to not employing new planning officers, relying on natural wastage, obviously getting financial consultants in for planning? My question is what was the strategy for attempting to deal with the shortfall that was in place in 2020 to now? Because as I understand it, the shortfall has increased now.
Okay, direct question. Flo, you've got your hand up.
Not in relation to that point, in relation to a few previous points, but I'm happy to wait.
Okay, well, Councillor Durkin has asked a question. Is it possible to... Councillor Hartley?
Well, I'll have a go at answering and offer a full written response if my answer isn't fulsome enough for Councillor Durkin. When we came into office, there were an awful lot of long-standing vacancies that were part of the budget, and part of the savings that we needed to make, we asked for vacancies, long-standing vacancies, to be removed from departmental budgets, and for business cases to be submitted by managers for the recruitment requirements that they had. Planning was one of the areas where that took place, in that the vacancies were removed and the business case was requested. An adequate business case was never received. The ability to recruit and to sort this out was entirely in managers' hands, and it was a case of requesting that there was a plan brought forward for recruitment and for the necessary number of staff that were required for the area, and that was awaited and awaited. And since Florence has been here, there a plan has been received and is being actioned. But prior to that, an adequate plan was not submitted by the managers, and therefore there was an hiatus created as a consequence of that.
Thank you. Councillor Durkin.
Thank you, Chair. I will come back on it if I may. Yes, I would like a more fulsome response, Councillor Harvey. My question is, what was the plan? You say there that it was or maybe not the administration's attempt to get information from the managers by way of a business case after you have cancelled the recruitment of officers to deal with the shortfall in the council planning department. My question is, why was this not chased up? Why was it allowed to fester on the vine until Flo Churchill came into place, and now there's going to be a fulsome response? So I'm concerned that there were a number of issues which you just stated were not chased up by the relevant cabinet member after a clear indication that you must stop recruitment, and oh, by the way, let us know what you plan to do about it. And then there was nothing coming back. There
wasn't.
Please, can I finish my statement?
Sorry, I thought you had.
No, I'm breathing still. Thank you, Councillor Harvey. What I'm saying is there seems to have been a difference between the left hand and the right hand. If you're not getting what you want, you ask the officers for what you want. That didn't seem to be happening from what you said to me. Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Now I've finished.
Well, there wasn't a halt on recruitment. There was a request for business cases to be submitted for the recruitment that was required, and those requests were made to officers, and the business cases were not forthcoming.
Can I come back on
it's
that?
It's not a case of the request not being asked once and then being left there. It was chased by the previous cabinet member and by me from when I took the portfolio over in the summer. But when we don't get what we ask for and we ask for it again, we just have to keep asking.
Thank you, and I think that's the problem. You keep asking, but to call a halt to recruitment and then to require a business case of officers, senior officers, and then not to chase it up to get an answer within 3 years, I think is lamentable. So,
well, that's not what happened, though, is it?
Councillor Harvey, I'm still speaking. Thank you.
But you're not telling the truth, are you? You're not actually. You're misrepresenting what I've said.
Well, I'm sorry, that's my interpretation of what you said.
Hang on.
I'd rather you didn't misrepresent it.
Hang on. Let's have some, right, pause for breath. Right, Councillor Harvey, can you, for the sake of the meeting, just make your position clear again so that Councillor Durkin doesn't misunderstand what you meant?
There was no halt placed on recruitment. Recruitment was requested in response to a business case, there was a question mark over whether there were whether the planning team was at a correct staff complement, and a business case was requested from the managers for the level of staffing that was required in order to process the number of planning applications that the department had to deal with. And that was the point that was at question. What was deleted from the budget were, across the whole organisation, long-standing vacancies which were budgeted into and then not being recruited into. And that wasn't just a problem in planning. That was a problem across the organisation, where there was basically money sat in the budget for vacancies that were not being filled by staff, and the funds were being used for other purposes. And that had been a long-standing practice in the council. So what we did was brought it back onto a proper business footing, where vacancies were requested as part of business cases for the service. And as a consequence of that, some areas did come forward with business cases, and those recruitments went ahead. Where there was a delay in receiving those business cases, it obviously meant that there was a delay in actually getting staff put in on the ground. But part of the part of the problem that we've had is getting timely response to those sorts of requests.
Okay, just to draw a line under this particular point, is it the case, therefore, that when you're running a planning service, you obviously need the right levels of staff, and you need the right positions? You need a conservation officer, you need a planning officer, you need different officers to run the service as a whole. Was there a failing to just check that we've got enough people covering those key posts? Because what I've certainly experienced is when you haven't got a consultee in place or an officer in place, it has a cascade effect to an application, which then creates delays and too much work falling on the shoulders of one person. So I suppose the question is, how confident is the council now of its staffing level to ensure that it's got a planning service that can cope with its demands?
Well, there are some specialisms that are proving difficult to recruit into. Presently, we have a shortfall of ecologists, and that's a national problem. If there's anybody out there listening who wants to be an ecologist or is an experienced ecologist and would love to come work in Herefordshire, please do get in touch. But we have a shortfall of ecologists, and there are some planning applications which do require input from that particular specialism in order for the planning application to be determined. So that is continuing to cause a delay for a fraction of the planning applications that we have at the moment. But there have been problems in the past with recruiting archaeologists, with recruiting conservation officers. In fact, historically, prior to 2019, some conservation officers, we did actually reduce our numbers, perhaps below the level that there should have been, and there's been a need to re-recruit into that specialist area, given the amount of well, we're very fortunate to have the number of conservation areas and listed buildings that we do have across the county. But that specialism was significantly depleted as a consequence of previous reorganisation of the planning service. It's really important to size the service correctly and to get the right mix of specialists to provide that technical support to the planning officers.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Harvey. Councillor Durkin just wanted to close off his point, and then we go through Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, this is all about staffing levels, adequate staffing levels of the right sort and the right experience and expertise. it's not about when you came into office, councillor. It's what I'm looking at, and I do want a recommendation asking for this report, fulsome report that you offered earlier. I'm looking at the situation whereby there's a de facto hold on recruiting because it was mentioned that all recruiting was stopped, all long-term recruiting was stopped, and it was brought to the attention of the managers that they must do a business case, and it was not adequately followed up. That's the point I want to tease out of your fulsome response. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Right,
Can I
Councillor.
just reiterate, Chair, there was not a halt on recruitment. There was a request for business cases to be made for the vacancies that were required. That is all.
Yes, and they were not forthcoming. Yeah, okay, we understand. Thank you for the clarification. Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, Chair. I have got a question, but I'll just come back on that point. I'm a manager of people. I'm a manager of lots of departments. It's a standard business practice to produce reports stating why you need the staffing. That is standard business across. So if my manager comes to me and I want some more staff, I put in a report. If I don't do it, that's down to my poor management. So regardless of who's in administration, it's about the management and culture of this council that needs to be addressed. Business cases are standard. It's not down to councillors to decide if there's enough workers in a team. That's down to the management to decide. They're the ones that do the job on a day-to-day basis and know what they need in their team. And if they want to recruit more, it's standard business practice to do a report saying, I'd like to employ another person for these reasons, X, Y and Z. So I don't think it's all to do with councillors and saying a business case is what's requested for all recruitment in lots and lots of areas. So I just think that's something that we need to think about. In terms of enforcement, I'm concerned that in Herefordshire we seem to have lots of people who go ahead with doing some development and then they retrospectively ask for forgiveness and permission and say, oh, sorry, I didn't realise I could do that, and did it anyway. So I'd like to look at maybe we could do a more joined up approach to enforcement. Because I know we've got lots of enforcement officers in lots of different roles in this council. So I'd like to look at the enforcement role and say, as a recommendation possibly, options to deliver enforcement action more effectively and efficiently across planning and the other services, and see if there's any joined up working we can do, because we've got lots of enforcement officers in different departments. Not sure if it is or isn't possible, but something to look at, maybe. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor, well, probably you wanted to think about a recommendation along those lines. I didn't want to lose that point. It's more of an open question, really. Yeah. We mustn't lose that point that you've just made. Councillor, I've got Councillor Wilding on my list next.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to come back to that previous question. I've got another one, but the previous answer that Flo Churchill gave, thanks for that. And I'm pleased to hear about the private member's bill. However, is there not a way you can use non-compliance at the moment on a non-compliance on a previous application to affect a decision on a current application? It didn't feel to me like that part of the question was actually answered. You know, a private member's bill may or may not come through and it might take 5 years. What we need is something, because, you know, at my last parish council meeting, I had like 20 people, members of the public there, all complaining about a particular developer, saying, you know, we're living in his previous development. He hasn't done all these things he's promised. And here he is being given perhaps permission to build another 21 houses, which will, and he's promising exactly the same conditions will be met, which he hasn't met on his previous applications. So to me, it seems like there's an absolute place there to get some teeth in. And I'm not happy that we have to wait for a private member's bill for it. So that's the one thing. What I was going to talk about, though, was I think I'll leave my next bit. It was about training. I'll wait until we've got into that. Perhaps we could just focus on the enforcement. Thanks.
Okay, Flo, sorry, did you want to come back on Councillor Wilding's point or Councillor Bowes' point before?
On Councillor Wilding's point, if I may, we cannot use our powers to determine applications in a punitive manner on retrospective planning applications. So we can't punish people for their previous behaviour. We're not allowed to. If we did, it would be a perverse decision in terms of the way that we make decisions, and it would be challengeable, however frustrating that is. And I think as officers, we share members' frustration sometimes about the behaviour of some applicants, but we're not allowed to punish them in any way. The other point to bear in mind is that planning decisions, and this comes back to something we were talking about earlier on about consistency, planning decisions don't create a precedent. However, the authority is required to be consistent in its decision making, and that's a very delicate balance for members to achieve. And I think it's something that that we need to carry out, that quality assurance check on the decision making across the authority as a whole in terms of planning, to look to make sure that we are being consistent. Sorry, I do apologise. Being consistent with our.
I was talking about planning having teeth.
That's the response you got there.
I do apologise. I've got a.
Flo can bring her dog to.
I'm not sure my dog will be up to it. He's a very lovely rescued hunting dog from Spain, and he's only got one eye, so not the best. So getting back onto the matter. So one, we can't take punitive action. We're not allowed to. But secondly, in terms of the quality assurance and consistency argument, it is something that we need to look at. At the moment, planning reports are checked by the lead development management officer. I'm quite happy to get involved in looking at the quality assurance issues and to review reports going forward. I've begun that process already.
Okay, just before Councillor Summers comes in, because my question is relevant to Councillor Wilding's point, and I think Councillor Wilding has highlighted a really important point. Where members of the public, and they often congregate around the parish council, hear that enforcement action isn't being taken, it gives this impression that there's no action taken. And I take Flo's point about enforcement action is not punitive, absolutely not. But I think the frustration would be that if planning conditions aren't kept to and enforcement action taken to ensure those planning conditions are complied with, it then gives the developer the thought, well, they didn't bother last time in enforcing these conditions, so I'm just going to go ahead and know that the repercussions aren't quite damaging to me, so I can go ahead with my sloppy practices, let's say. I don't know about the instance that Councillor Wilding's saying, but if a developer isn't keen to dot all the I's and cross all the T's, then they'll have that mindset going into a fresh application, and then that's what creates the disillusionment with members of the public, where an enforcement team are thinking, well, it's just not expedient to pursue, so it just puts the service into a negative light. But a fundamental question has to be, is that at the planning stage, are conditions being put on there that really perhaps shouldn't be there because they're not enforceable, so that it doesn't raise the expectations of members of the public and present a service in terms of failing to achieve compliance with conditions that probably shouldn't have been there. So there's two aspects to that there, I think. Therefore, there's A, having realistic conditions that can be enforced, so that it doesn't make a service look weak. And secondly, maybe it's advisable to be robust in ensuring these conditions are achieved, so that it doesn't perpetuate a problem later on down the line, which is the feelings, I presume, Councillor Wilding, that are in the parishioners' minds. So realistic conditions and a realistic approach. And it goes to my big question that I have for planning enforcement, and we haven't talked about it yet, is are officers and is the cabinet member confident that there's the legal support required for this action? Because it's all very well saying, oh, an officer didn't go here, or an officer didn't go there, or they didn't write that letter, or they didn't serve that notice. But if there isn't this fundamental support from a legal perspective behind the service, then it does hamstring officers' ability to take robust action. So I'd be interested in some comments around those themes that I've picked up.
If I could come back on that particular issue, yes, we get the support from our legal colleagues that we need. In fact, in a lot of cases, they go above and beyond helping us support enforcement action. What we have identified is that we need further training for officers in terms of investigatory skills to ensure that the way we investigate complaints means that we don't create issues for ourselves later when we want to take action. I think that's really important. The other thing to bear in mind is when we impose conditions on planning applications, we have to give reasons for imposing those conditions. And that is the chance for us to be more robust about the conditions that we impose and why we are imposing them. I think that that's really, really important. Conditions, there are a number of tests that apply to conditions, and we shouldn't be imposing conditions that aren't enforceable. There's no point. It's as simple as that. That will form part of the quality assurance check that we will need to be doing. Sometimes I personally do a lot of training with town and parish councils on planning matters. I give some advice to the National Association of Local Councils and several county associations, and it's one of the issues that members sometimes need more support in coming to conditions that actually will do what they need them to do. What isn't appropriate, and I'm not aware of it happening at Herefordshire, is members delegating conditions to officers. If members want to make a decision that's subject to conditions, then we as officers need to support you as members in providing those conditions so that you don't make decisions subject to conditions. Those conditions are in place when you're making the decisions.
Okay, thank you for that. I've got a few more points that I'd like to raise on enforcement, but I'll come back. I'll keep waiting. Councillors, Sutters.
Thank you, Chair. There's a reinforcement and 106.1 is a major issue in my ward, so we need to show there is consistent quality and quality assurance, so I'm happy to see that you might be looking at that. But I'm going to go back to the peer review, and the review also commented that trust between members and officer needs to improve. Now, I know I've raised this before. I've raised it time and time again over the last few years, but the trust between members and officers needs to improve. And I have 5 parish councils where it also needs to improve, because parish councils don't believe they're listened to. I don't have the only 5 parish councils in the county that don't think they're being listened to. So question I've got for you, Flo, what has been factored in to regain trust? Because to my mind, there's very little of it right now. Thank you.
If I can respond to that, Councillor Summers, I think communication is the biggest issue in regaining the trust between members and officers, and communication is something that we have all acknowledged that as officers we are not good on, which is why we're talking about introducing a planning protocol that will govern how we as officers respond to member issues, member inquiries, member emails, member telephone calls, and actually set some standards of expected behaviour from officers to members. And that is one way of rebuilding the trust. Our officers do a good job. They're just not as good as we might want about communicating that.
We used to be asked if we would agree that this could be done, whatever could be done, and we communicate with the officer, and the decision would be made. And if we needed to look further in, they would look further into it. Now we don't get that chance anymore. It comes out to us saying, if you don't agree, take it through process, which is, if you know the process, callbacks, etc., it's very difficult. So I think we need to be looking at that communication even more than we're looking at it now. Thank you.
And so if I might say, redirection is governed by our constitution. So the way in which redirection occurs is governed by our constitution. So you may want to look at that as well.
We get consulted. You don't.
Thank you for that answer, Flo. I think I would like to add to Councillor Summers' point really, and it's that a lot of the time members are in a situation where they're on the front line, as it were, in a parish council meeting, and you can guarantee that if a planning application is controversial, that's where the front line will be, because that's where members of the public come and feel that they need to express their views. It's very rare that, in my experience, it's very rare that lots of members of the public will turn up to a planning committee meeting, but they will certainly turn up to a parish council meeting. And I see the role of the ward member there as a very positive role in making sure that members of the public are understanding the process and what could go in their favour or what could go in a way that they disagree. And so making sure that officers are aware that they can utilise the position of a member to explain the planning process, and if officers give ward members, information about applications, it really helps them in their liaison role between the council and the community. And I wonder whether the planning service really appreciates the hot seat that members find themselves sitting in when there's a very controversial planning application. And I can think of many members who are very professional in their way about how they go about liaising with competing views, and some people in the community want an application where others really opposed it, and it's a very difficult position for a member to be in. But if there isn't that support by the officers in that role, then I think we're missing a trick here. And so it's all very well to say that better training for members, better training for officers. But if there isn't that recognition of the role that members have to play, whether they like it or not, then we're missing a trick here in trying to work with communities to understand planning applications. So I'm thinking about a recommendation around that, but I'm still not confident that there's this corporate understanding of how members play a vital role in that. But I've got Councillor Bowes.
Sorry, thank you. Just to confirm, I do get consulted and asked about delegated authority, and I just wanted to say we do have some great planning officers. Yeah. Simon Withers, just like to sing his praises, great guy, and a new graduate recruitment called Josh, I believe, very, very good. My question is whether or not the government provides clarity on SIL and Section 106. What assurances are provided that community infrastructure will be properly thought through in terms of the requirement for the updated core strategy? I'm just worried that we're missing something there, so I'd like to possibly suggest a recommendation around the update of the core strategy includes community infrastructure delivery plan, so that we've got some clarity on that. Thank you.
Okay, another recommendation. Flo's got her hand up.
Yes, Councillor Bowes, we have to produce an infrastructure delivery plan alongside the local plan, which is what we will be doing. It's a document that's needed before we submit to the Inspectorate for public examination. So an infrastructure delivery plan which looks at the infrastructure that's required to support the level of development in the local plan is something we have to produce.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next question. I've got a question with regard to the regulations, planning regulations. Some enforcement investigations are triggered by the fact that a member of the public will just build something, not really realising that they've breached the planning regulations. Is there a thought that we should be doing more to promote what the planning regulations are, so that householders don't fall foul of the fact that their shed is bigger than they thought they could have, and then that's triggered a breach of planning control. Because I know that these regulations they're out there somewhere on the internet, but sometimes for the uninitiated they're hard to find. So, I'd be thinking of a recommendation that said, what is the council doing to ensure that members of the public, along with their council tax bills, are made aware of what the planning regulations are?
If I can come back on that, this is something that Councillor Harvey has raised with us directly as officers as well. And I think you're right, planning regulations are an arcane labyrinth of conflicting regulations and guidance. There is, however, a very good website published by the planning portal that has an interactive link that you can go on, look at what you want to do, and it tells you whether you need planning permission or not. It's kept up to date because the rights change frequently. Permitted development rights have changed frequently, and it's an ongoing challenge to us. I think it's something that we need to look at in terms of the way we present our information on our website and provide those links to members of the public in a clear and transparent way so they can get the guidance.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Stark.
Thank you, Chair. I've raised the issue of linking capacity to demand. And I know, Ben, I've got a recommendation on capacity. Maybe we need to link it to demand. Can I now turn to funding, Chair? And this ridiculous sort of situation we find ourselves in this council, when the most essential part in some respects of our core budget area, economy and place or environment, only has 16% of that budget allocated to it. The area where most of our essential services are delivered to the majority of householders. My concern, Chair, is we could talk about this PAS review, we could talk about restructuring, we could talk about capacity, we could talk about demand, but there's an underlying problem here, which we are allocating less and less and less of our budget to the particular area that includes planning and all the other enforcement activity. So I'm not confident, Chair, that even if we had these recommendations, even if we work this through, and I know it'll be interesting to see what Councillor Harvey has got to say, that we have actually got the funding right in terms of the split across each of the major areas that we are responsible for. Now, I accept that in social care, in children's services, these are statutory services, but there are also statutory services in this area of economy and environment. And I think we've taken our eye off the ball in this county. I think over the years, and I agree that austerity has been a challenge for everybody, but I suspect that in order to preserve the other two areas, we have allowed this particular important area for our residents, our council taxpayers, to actually fall by the wayside, to almost be the mantissa, the what's left over, as it were, after we've allocated the budgets to the other two areas. So one of the issues for us, and we need to have a recommendation around it, is what we do about the core funding in this area, which would also help to support the funding of the planning service as well. I don't know what that recommendation will be, whether it's a review of it, Ross, or what, because I don't know what the position is in other councils. But that is the weakness here, that we can talk about each of our essential services in your area, but if the underlying funding isn't there, then we're not going to get very far with it. Thank you, Chair.
Is there a specific question that you would like to address to anyone, or was it?
No, it was an observation on the back of the capacity demand thing.
So will the recommendation be, given the aspirations of the improvement plan, is there sufficient resources to achieve that?
It's more than that, because the problem is that when you allocate the budget, you're splitting it across the three areas. There needs to be a fundamental change in the way we look at this area. I don't know how we can do that, whether we need to lobby government or not, but we cannot keep rob in this area to support the other two areas, however desirable that might be, because this is the result. We are actually finding that some of our essential services, it's not just planning, environmental health, trading standards, the sort of areas that people, our roads, everything, the areas that people want services to be delivered to them, we are failing them, and that's something that we need to look at. I'm not sure what the recommendation should be. Perhaps it is just for Councillor Harvey, along with Ross and others, to review the decisions that are taken to make that split, to see how we can somehow redress the issue with economy and environment in terms of its allocated amount. Something along those lines, Ben. I think if you could tease it out.
Because what I'm thinking about, we're talking about improvement plans, we're talking about improving the way that the service tackles various specific issues, and just in my mind, in response to your concerns, it's just a very simple question. Given the improvements that want to be made, is there the resource to fund that?
Yeah.
And I think we can think of other issues, but at least if we capture that one recommendation, I think that makes it pretty clear what we're asking.
I think also what Councillor Stark's saying is maybe we need to lobby government to make sure that we have adequate funding for those areas, because at the moment we're cutting back in those areas because there isn't enough funding in others, and we're having to give the majority of the money to those other areas, and really government need to be giving us more money so that we can split it more equal.
I mean, we could put it to the executive that we could say to the relevant ministers, this is a position we found ourselves in, where only 16% of our core budget is now spent on this range of essential services. We don't think that's enough, and we want you to respond by helping us to actually increase that share, so that council taxpayers don't come up to me and say, as they did the other day, what am I getting for my £3,000?
Yeah.
And I'm saying, well, I can't guarantee you will get anything from your perspective, because your children are grown up, so they're not in education, you've got no one in care in this particular instance, you're not tapping into the other services that we provide, and so I can't guarantee that what's left is going to satisfy you in terms of whether you think you're getting value for money. And so I don't mind two recommendations here, Chair, one that you've said, and one that we get the executive to lobby government on this powerless position we find ourselves in. And I don't want to, as a member, keep having to apologise for it. As I said at council, if there's money there, let's start spending it on the essential services that we need to provide, and that council taxpayers have a right to deserve to have.
Thank you, Councillor Stark. Councillor Wilding.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just on that funding issue, this is perhaps a naive question. So why can't we increase the planning application charges so they do cover the costs and bring in an income stream for the council? You know, at the moment, the planning application costs are quite small, and they're becoming less and less of a percentage of what it costs to do a building or whatever. I'm guessing perhaps there's a cap on what we can charge, but if that is not the case, then why can't we increase the charge? It would save, because at the moment it seems like a lot of the planning service is being paid by ordinary council taxpayers who might not be contemplating an application or a development, and they're paying for, helping to subsidise people that are putting maybe a £70,000 extension on the side of their house. And at the moment, the council are charging quite a small amount to allow them to do that. Thanks.
Flo, I sense you want to come in on that specific point.
Yes, please. Planning application fees are set nationally. We have no discretion about them whatsoever. There's been a lot of campaigning to allow local authorities to set planning application fees locally, and the government has always failed to approve that or to bring that forward. What we can look at are planning performance agreements for our more larger and complex cases, which is a paid for service for those larger and more complex cases to ensure that there is sufficient resource to be able to deal with them. You're absolutely right. Planning application fees cover about, for householder applications, something like 1/3 to 1/4 of the cost of processing the application. And it's widely acknowledged that planning application fees go nowhere near paying for the service.
Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, just to say, Chair, that you know, we've had an extra 1.4 million pounds worth of additional bids and pressures in the technical services section of economy and environment, which is where the planning department sits in the budget that was just approved. So, you know, we are recognising where there are, you know, additional expenses that are likely to be incurred in the coming year, and where we actually need to make investments to change the way that services are being delivered. In addition, there was argued by officers to have been a structural there was a structural issue in terms of the assumptions that had been made historically and rolled forward on expectations for income from planning applications, which required a £400,000 adjustment in terms of the anticipated income to come from planning services in the coming year, and that was also included in the budget. So, you know, it's incorrect to say that, you know, investments are not being made and cost pressures are not being recognised. They absolutely are. And, you know, these were the figures that were presented to the committee only a couple of months ago for you to scrutinise in detail.
Councillor Stark, you wanted to come back?
Yeah, Councillor Harvey, I'm not saying we're not trying to invest in this area. What I'm saying is that the overall share of this area as part of the overall core budget is actually declining. And that point was made by me when we had the budget setting meeting as well. And that's what I'm concerned about, how we reverse that, Councillor Harvey, how we make sure that we actually focus on this area in a way that actually does reverse that trend.
Yeah, I do take your point, Councillor Stark, and I do remember you making this point in the budget scrutiny meeting. But it really is a function of mathematics. If the budget pressures going up in the social care areas of the council are outstripping the rate at which we are able to raise the council tax, then the only place we've got to go for the difference in funding is the non-statutory service areas, which all sit in economy and environment. And that's just the reality of the austerity policy, if you like, that's been in place by central government for 10 years or more, and the intention to remove the redistribution of wealth through general taxation and the general grant to local government from local government's funding stream. So, you know, everybody write to Sir William about that, as we do, and we write to ministers and make the case on behalf of the council on a regular basis. But you know, it is the consequence of the way that government policy is affecting the funding of local government. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what coloured politician sits in the chair. You know, whoever's responsible at the, you know, at any time for the budget faces that stark reality, as Councillor Lester will recognise from his time as leader of the council previously.
So, which is, thank you, Councillor Harvey, thank you for reminding me. I think the point, that's why I really want to get to the nuts and bolts of, there are some really good ideas here that could improve matters. And because Councillor Stark's always worrying about the money side of things, as we all are, it's just to bottom out, just this reassurance that we've got the money allocated to achieve all of these things that can improve the service. If I can, whilst we're on funding of the planning service, I know that planning applications are set nationally. The planning fees are set nationally. But one thing, we have greater control over the cost of services that we provide, like pre-app advice, things like that. Which I just wanted to ask those under scrutiny today. There is a pre-app advice system, and really want to get behind the thought process about, is that service working as well as it could be working? Is it working effectively? Do applicants have a faith that that is a worthwhile service to spend their money on? Or if the service that they get is one which clarifies the council's position in a way that's so sitting on the fence, is that really a good service? And is it so that applicants think, well, I might as well just go ahead and apply for planning permission because they're not confident that a pre-app advice service will do them any good? If it would work well, if it does work well, what evidence have we got that it is working well and that that is a worthwhile process for applicants to utilise? Because I'm sure members will all have examples where someone's had pre-app advice, been told one thing, but when it comes to the actual application, they get another story. I see Councillor Harvey's got a hand up, so did you want to come in on that point?
Yeah, it's a good question, Chairman, and there are local authorities who have won awards for their pre-application advice process, and it's one of the areas where I'm hoping. I think Wolverhampton is one of the areas that has been seen as being an exemplar in how it's been using pre-application advice in a good way to influence how things, how development comes forward in the authority. And I'm hoping that that Mr. Cook will be able to bring his experience on that, and as one of many areas, to take a look at how we're doing things here in Herefordshire and whether we're getting it right. On the face of it, you could say, well, the thing to do is to increase our income by raising our pre-app fees, but counterintuitively, I think there's a big question to ask about whether we're actually charging too much for pre-application advice, and that it's actually driving some negative behaviours. But I think it's for people with professional experience in the area to take a look at how we're doing things here, and to take a look at our development market, and to work out what the right mix is of pre-app advice versus the agents and consultants that applicants can go to for professional advice in preparing their planning applications, and what the right thing to do is.
Well, thank you for that, Councillor Harvey. And in view of that and my thinking on the matter, I'd quite like a recommendation put forward to this from the scrutiny committee to say, can there be a review of the pre-app service? Is it value for money? Is it working as effectively as it could be? Is the charging correct? Are we charging too much? As Councillor Harvey said, it might be the case in certain circumstances. How are we gauging whether this is a service that's, it's meeting its expectations of members of the public or agents who have to deal with us on a daily basis? And so a review of that key. Right, because for most people it can be the first point of contact in the planning process, and if that's not as good as it could be, that I take it, I think we're all agreed that the pre-app service is there to try and help matters along, but if it's it's not functioning as effectively it could be something that's hindering our progress. Councillor Stark, you wanted to come in, but sorry, Ross, did I see you?
I was going to do about Mark.
No, you go first.
If it's about this point, if it's okay, Ross.
It was, Chair, thank you. And just to pick up on Councillor Harvey's comment, really, I mean, for me, absolutely, it's part of the review I'll be doing across all the directorate is around the traded services. So those services that we are actually offering some sort of premium service to residents or applicants in this situation. As we all know from our own experiences, you'll want to get what you're paying for. So if you're, for example, if you're paying that sort of priority service for your passport application, you do it because you want to get it a lot quicker, or you will get the advice from it. If you don't get that, you're not going to pay for it. And this is one of those examples where we need to make sure that the resource is there to provide the service people are paying for. And then you look at that value for money question that they're saying, well, should I pay for it? What will I get for it in return? And is it worth it commercially? Because most of these will be commercial opportunities. And I think, we just need to review, as Councillor Harvey said, the fees themselves, but actually the sort of the process of what you then get in return for that, because it should be a service that people want. That's the whole point of it being there. And if people are seeing there's no reason to do that, or they're almost taking a punt to say, well, actually, no, I'll still take some advice and I'll get, because to be fair, the planning officers are always try to help. At the end of the day, they want to make sure that the planning process and the applications work. But what we need to do is just slightly separate those two things to make sure that if we are going to offer a service, that people would make sure that they do get the value for money that they're looking for.
Councillor Stark, was it about this point? Because I'm conscious that Councillor Bowes is next.
It's the obverse of this point. It's about derelict sites. We do have the power under section 215 to ask those that own derelict sites across the county to clean up the site. But that's often not enough for my residents, given that I have got some derelict sites in my ward. I don't know if there's a recommendation here, but Flo, do you think we do enough under section 215 in terms of ensuring that owners of derelict sites have a plan to actually develop them?
Under section 215, it's otherwise referred to as the untidy land notice. We can issue a notice impelling them to tidy up the land, and if they don't, the authority can take direct action and recover costs afterwards. That's quite an involved process. So section 215 is one of the enforcement tools that we have, but it is something that we can look at our approach to direct action, because that is that's a direct cost to the authority that isn't always recovered.
Yeah, because what I'm thinking here is that this goes on for years, and somebody somewhere has to say enough's enough, because sometimes it might suit the owner just to leave the site derelict, but it has a major impact on amenity in that area. And what towns like Ross, which is promoting its tourist potential, the last thing you want is derelict sites near the river or anywhere where they might be spotted by visitors. So perhaps, Chair, there is a recommendation here along what you've just said, Flo, about perhaps looking at what direct action we can take beyond the issue of a section 215 notice to ensure that there is some sort of timetable for owners to actually do more than simply tidy up these properties, but actually develop them as they should be doing.
Sorry, if I can just come in on that point. We can't compel people to carry out development. We can compel them to tidy up the land. We can't compel them to carry out development. In the same way that if someone gets planning permission, there is nothing we can do to make them carry out that planning permission. There's nothing legally we can do.
Actually, there is.
So what can we do then?
We can compel them to tidy up the land, but tidying, the definition of what is tidying up is not development as such.
Are there any moves anywhere to actually provide us with that weapon to actually make owners actually develop the sites themselves?
No, there aren't any tools that we have at the moment that allow us to do that. We can't, you can't make somebody build out a planning permission that they've got.
Okay, perhaps it's another one for the executive to lobby ministers on then. Because I think it's a very unsatisfactory situation to be in, Chair.
There is if the council does default work to tidy up the land, they can reclaim their costs, reasonable costs. If those costs aren't paid, then there's legal action that we can take, force the sale of the land to get the costs back. That's a process that's quite involved. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not like issuing a parking ticket, but there is that process. But it would really depend on the circumstances of the case. But I think if what you're saying is, can the council review how it does its default action and can more be done? I think that would be a good thing to review in terms of the enforcement service. Right, I've got Councillor Bowes who's been waiting patiently and also Councillor Wilding. Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 3 questions left for the whole session, so shall I just do one now and come in after the others?
I'm sure
Don't want to take over the whole. One of my questions is, what are officers' workloads like now, and have their appraisals highlighted any concerns?
Officer caseloads are something that we are looking at. In terms of, if you look at an average across the region, we are about average in terms of the number of cases, but different authorities carry different caseloads. It depends on the number of applications that we get in. And the other thing to bear in mind is the more senior officers have a smaller caseload because they tend to get the more complex applications. So we are looking at how we assign caseloads to officers and how we deal with that. One of the issues in dealing with the planning backlog is our attempt to deal with the planning backlog by the beginning of the next financial year, so that officers don't start the next financial year with a caseload that comprises of old historic applications awaiting determination for a long time. So it is one of the matters that we're looking at, and we do benchmark that against other authorities. I mean, caseloads can vary massively across authorities. In some old-fashioned county authorities, caseloads can be as low as 10 or 12 because they're dealing with county-type matters. In other city centre authorities, they can be as high as 100 active cases per officer. I think our caseload is averaging around 70 at the moment.
I'm quite happy to let others have a go and then I'll come.
Okay, Councillor Wilding.
Thanks, Chair. I'll just make a comment about the section 215 and then I'll get to another question. That 215 and all that stuff is just another example of our toothless enforcement situation. Again, I have another example in my ward, which has been a derelict site for 40 years. The council has tried on numerous occasions, written to the owner, and the letters just come back undelivered, and it never goes any further. They've recently again written, well, I say recently, 3 months or so ago, asking them to do something about it. And as far as I know, nothing has happened. They haven't had a reply. And so that just highlights how toothless our enforcement process is. Just nothing can be done. And that's just to tidy up a site which has just been a dumping ground in the middle of a beautiful area of the countryside for 40 years. But what I wanted to talk about was the in-house ecology. I know it's been mentioned before, but do we need to improve? How are we going to improve our ecology service so that we are more capable of identifying where habitats and regulation assessments are required and making sure that we do scrutinise them sufficiently robustly? Does the council's CEE, Climate Ecological Emergency Team, robustly challenge applications against the council's carbon commitments and action plan? Because I don't think they do. I think this council has voted overwhelmingly to declare a climate and ecological emergency, and yet in planning meetings, we constantly get stuff said or allowed which completely goes against it. And I know what's going to happen. Somebody's going to say, well, that's because of government regulations, which seems to be the answer to all my queries. So there we go. Thank you.
Well, let's see what Flo has to say, because she's got a hand up, and I presume it's in response to your question.
It is a lot to do with government regulations and policy and so on and so forth. But that is changing as a result of the Environment Act. So the Environment Act got royal assent in November last year, and we're waiting the enabling regulations. But that Environment Act is going some way to giving the council further tools to deal with pollution, to take into account as a material consideration sustainability and so on the various aspects of it. So it is something that is changing. And as I say, I think that's why it's important that we provide members with the training on the implications of the Environment Act. For instance, the Environment Act proposes a legally binding target for air pollution. Until we've got the enabling legislation, we're not in a position to say how we can take that into account, but that will become a material consideration in the determination of planning applications and will be a reason that members can refuse planning applications going forward. So things are changing as we speak.
Can I just come back on that for a second, Chair?
Sure, absolutely.
It's interesting that you mentioned members, because I think slightly the problem is that members of the planning committee do need better training in terms of understanding the climate and ecological emergency, because during a planning meeting, many members behave and comment about an application in a way which makes it obvious that they do not really believe the climate and ecological emergency is happening. Comments are made that deny that proper sustainable measures are needed, that ecological measures are needed. In other words, they're happy to greenwash the council's climate ambitions, but as soon as it comes to actually making the real changes needed, they shy away and vote for things to stay as they are. It's often, and it's also often made obvious that they believe members who do bring up climate and ecological concerns are basically snowflakes who are not living in the real world, when in fact the council has voted for a climate and ecological emergency to be recognised, and they're allowed to say these things in planning meetings. All right, thanks. So they need better training.
Okay, right. We've got two more questions from Councillor Bowes, but Councillor Bowen and then Councillor Durkin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can remember a completion order being imposed on a site in my ward. So is that still a viable and extant order we can impose? Because that would actually make people finish off their planning if they are half built or quarter built. Can we still do a completion order, just as a starter?
Chair, if I can answer that, I'm not familiar with completion orders, and in planning terms, there is nothing we can do to compel developers to build out partially built or even, to build out unbuilt permissions. I don't know what you're referring to in terms of completion order. Maybe something under building regulations, but certainly under planning, there is nothing we can do to compel developers to start or finish development.
I'm certainly, it was used in my ward some time ago, I have to say, but whether it was under building regs or under planning, couldn't be absolutely certain. Building control. Maybe just building control, but surely we can make use of that then. I mean, planning.
As I said, I mean, we'll look into that. It's not something I'm familiar with, and in my 30 years in planning, it's not something I've ever come across.
Well, something new perhaps. That might be something we could use as well to the benefit of sites that are not being properly used and are just going to waste, in fact. And how often do we actually impose a stop when they've reached their time limit for 3 years, 2 years, 5 years, whatever it may be? I believe the time limits have gone down. How much do we impose those as well?
Well, there's not a stop for us to impose. If they haven't carried out their development within the time limits, they no longer have their planning permission expires. So they don't have a planning permission if they go out with the time limits. But once they've started their planning permission, once they've implemented it, then it's implemented in perpetuity.
Yes, but the start is sometimes a very feeble start, is it not?
It's a very low test, yes.
Could we improve that test and make it a bit more robust so they actually don't just leave a few bricks in the ground and a bit of cement tacking them together?
I'm sure Sharon will come in and talk about this. There's a great deal of case law, but actually it is a very low test about how you implement a planning permission in order to keep it alive.
I think it's disappointing that we can't do something better about that and actually get these planning permissions done. Otherwise, we'll always be trying to get more when actually there's quite a lot of planning that is allowed and has not been completed. That is mad, surely.
Indeed, if you look at the housing delivery test results for authorities across the whole of the country, which measures how many houses have been provided in the last 3 years, as opposed to how many they should have provided, some authorities are providing more than 400% of the amount of giving planning permission for more than 400% of the amount of housing that they're required to provide. In Northumberland, another unitary authority that I've had experience in, there were significant, and I'm talking thousands of unimplemented planning permissions. And it must be very frustrating for members not to be able to force developers to implement those permissions.
I agree. It's extremely frustrating, I think, and it's a very wasteful time, I think, too. Very wasteful process where we can't actually say, you've got this planning permission, now you build it, please. Because what's the point of applying in the first place? It must have cost them a certain amount of money, and yet nothing happens. It seems extraordinary. And going to section 215, I have experience of this all too sadly in my particular ward, where it's taken years to get anything done. Is it the legalities that take the time, or what is the delay in all the extraordinary length of time which section 215 orders seem to take?
I don't know whether Sharon wants to come in on that point in particular, but with things like section 215 notices, there are time periods. You have to give people sufficient time to take action. You then have to, as a council, take the direct action to try and recover the costs, and there's a whole process that you need to go through to ensure that that's all done in a proper manner and not in any way challengeable.
That may be so, yes, I understand that entirely, but sometimes you feel the council is perhaps dragging its feet in a fairly major way because it avoids them spending money. And if you've got an important listed building that is falling apart because of lack of attention, because the council is not applying these orders properly, or in a very, shall we say, tardy fashion, that is, I think, a very big mistake. Thank you.
Right, okay, we've just paused for thought here. Sharon from our legal department has got a hand up. So Sharon, please, over to you.
Sorry, Chair, thank you very much. I was just going to clarify the position with regards to planning permission and the time periods for implementing them. There are time periods for implementing planning permission, but there is nothing that a local authority can do, as Florence has said, to compel a developer to go ahead and implement that planning permission. In terms of completion orders, I think that may be a creature of building control, just to clarify that position, rather than under the Town and Country Planning Act itself. That's all I wanted to clarify. Thank you, Chair.
What I would recommend is that this matter is reviewed, because section 94 of the Town and Country Planning Act is entitled Termination of Planning Permissions by reference to time limits, completion notices. So there is legislation there. Whether it can be appropriately deployed in this instance, I do not know. But I think a review of that specific matter and then further clarification to members, I think, would help. Councillor Bowes.
Mr. Chairman, could I just add a little bit to that? Just as a thank you. Sorry, Councillor. How often can an applicant actually ask for his planning permission to be extended? Can he go on forever and ever and ever, saying, well, we need a bit more time and this and that, or it's run out of space, can we please, it's about to terminate, can we have our planning permission extended. Is that a thing it can go on endlessly without termination? Or is there, or will they just go on land banking that until they think the ground has become so valuable they really find it worthwhile doing?
Again, Sharon, through chair, Sharon may have a comment on that, but my understanding is that they can't extend the life of a planning permission. They have to reapply.
Well, can they go on reapplying endlessly?
Yes, they can. There's nothing we can do to stop people putting in applications, apart from a consideration of whether the application is vexatious. If they are continuing to constantly apply for the permission, let it run out, apply again, time and time and time again. It's a judgment call about whether that becomes a vexatious applicant or not.
And then you can stop the whole process.
You can refuse to determine their applications if they're vexatious.
And then they go to appeal for non-determination, I suppose.
Well, no, it's refusing an application because it's a vexatious application is not the same as non-determination.
I'm glad to hear that. Sorry.
Okay, Councillor Durkin.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple of a comment and then a point. Going back to the specialist officers, if I may call them that, the ecology people. It's just a comment. I'm hoping that all efforts have been made to get these people in place, because it is an essential part of any planning process that we have a quick and effective turnaround. And with regards to a quick and effective turnaround, I note from the commentary just now that the planning officers have an average workload, circa 70. Is it still the case that the banner is appearing on responses to applicants that is being held, the application is being held in a pile and will be allocated to an officer at the earliest available? If that's still going on, even though we've got average workloads, advice, please?
Through the chair, my understanding is we are still making that comment. It is something that we are looking to change as the backlog gets dealt with, because the officer's caseload doesn't include the backlog figures.
If I may, Chairman, yeah, I understand from what was said earlier that the backlog is being dealt with by external consultants.
It is.
Are they running parallel with the planning officers? And if so, why are we not able to free up the application system so that people are dealt with in a timely fashion when they apply for their whatever it is they want to do? It's just a case of the banner is being. I'm getting a lot of commentary on the banner that appears saying what's going on. Why are we waiting? In my one case, 17 weeks for an allocation of an officer. So my point is, when's it going to be taken down if we've got officers who are on an average workload and we've got external consultants who are breaking up the backlog? Thank you, Chair.
Again, through the chair, that is something that we will look at and we'll report back to scrutiny on that.
I'm obliged, thank you.
On that theme, I've had immense frustration from members of the public and agents saying, I can't get through to the planning department, no one's answering my calls. I've received a copy of an email where an officer said, I'm not taking calls, that type of, because I'm very busy and all of that type of thing. Now, that's what happens as a result of, a backlog and the pressures that the phosphates issue has created on top of that, and then we've had COVID, and all of the pressures that are extraordinary when one thinks about it. But to what level now are we confident that, whether it's a member of the public who just wants a porch extension, or it's a developer an agent who's working on behalf of a developer who wants to build 10 homes, 100 homes or whatever the fee they're paying, they're still a customer of this council, and what confidence have we got that they're receiving that level of customer care that they deserve, given that they can't go and buy services elsewhere, they have to come to the local planning authority. They can't go to a neighbouring authority and say, can you determine my planning application for me, because you might be quicker. You know, how confident are we that, given all of the pressures that the officers have been under, that we are able to respond to applicants or agents in a timely manner and perhaps be proactive in ironing out planning issues that could be negotiated, solved, resolved by more communication?
If I can come back on that, the purpose of pre-application advice is to deal with those technical issues and resolve issues so that when the application comes forward for determination, it can be quite smooth. We can't compel people to take pre-application advice. So sometimes applicants choose to submit their applications without the benefit of pre-application advice. And in some instances, that doesn't impact on the length of time it takes to determine an application. In others, it does. So the whole pre-application issue is something that we are looking at. Coming back to the ecology and the ecology backlog, I am aware, because ecology isn't something that falls within my remit, although it falls within Ross's remit. It's something that's looked after by Phil Crossland, and he is looking and attempting to achieve solutions for that problem as we speak. I know it's something that's very real to the consideration of how we go forward at the moment, and Ross might be better placed to comment on what we're doing about the ecology side of things.
But Chloe, if I can come back about my point about our officers engaging with members of the public when they're the applicant and they need to phone the planning officer to know what's going on with their application, or the agent wants to know what's going on with the application. They've heard nothing, the client is there saying, what's happening to my planning application, where are we with this? And then in one instance recently, the first thing that the agent and the applicant knew about was they received their refusal notice. So, you know, there seems to be you know, where an applicant or an agent's thinking, well, everything seems to be going okay, there's a few things not quite right, but I'm just waiting for more liaison between the officer, and then all of a sudden the next thing they know, they've got a refusal. It just seems to be that there's this apparent disconnect between engaging with who are essentially our customers.
You're absolutely right. There is an issue there, and it is something that we're looking at as part of the review of the service and the way that we provide the service. We are very alert to this as an issue.
Okay, right, we've got Councillor Bowes, did you want to?
Yes, thank you. One more question and just a statement really. I'm not particularly au fait with planning because I'm not on planning committee and I don't luckily get many planning applications. But there is a frustration generally in the world at the moment with escalating energy costs, which are crippling families, that there doesn't seem to be any conditions that we can put on new development, i.e. for solar panels and things like that, that they can't at some point get out of somewhere in the process. So I don't know whether that's a recommendation we need to lobby government or if it will be in your Environment Act, but that is a frustration at the moment when families are struggling. But my main question was, I understand that the strategic planning and neighbourhood development planning teams have recently been brought together within the development management team. So I wondered how that was working, and are there other areas outside of planning that could benefit from coming under planning management, and what might these areas be?
Thank you for your comments there. Yes, strictly speaking, planning policy is split into two teams. We've got the strategic policy team that deal with the local plans, and then we've got the neighbourhood plan team. That used to be separate from development management under different directorates. They're now together, and we're getting a lot more liaison and cross silo working. We're trying to get away with the silos. My personal opinion is that planning may work better if things like ecology and conservation were under the same direct management, because at the moment they're not. I mean, as I said, that's my view, and I think it's something that may be worth looking at.
Okay, Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I talking about the last point, one hears all too often from the planning officers that the ecology people are unable to give their opinions for a very long time, and that is extremely frustrating in the form of delayed planning results. And that must surely be one of the first things we do to get that as a simple, seamless process. Thank you. I have a recommendation that the various legal orders, such as Section 215 and Section 106, be explained and clarified to all councillors, simple, clear terms, either in a briefing or in a note to them as soon as possible, so we do understand then what we're talking about and what we can and can't do. It'd be very useful.
Yes, I think that's a helpful recommendation.
Thank you.
Councillor Durkin.
Thank you, Chairman. The current planning recovery document, I understand related problems within planning. I understand that there were two previous planning recovery documents prepared in 2021, April and summer, but both were not implemented. And then they were permitted to come forward in 2022 in the spring now. Why did either of the first two not being carried out, bearing in mind that the problems in planning were, you could argue, not as severe as they are now? And why did it take over 1 year to establish that a recovery plan was actually required? Because what this has done is caused a delay in bringing in the planning consultants to clear the backlog, and has also increased, been expensive for applicants and giving rise to increased building costs. So my question is, why were the two previous planning recovery documents not actioned over more than a year ago? Thank you, Chairman.
Anyone like to pick up on that specific question from Councillor Durkin? Councillor Harvey.
Well, no, this is really going back to Councillor Durkin's previous points, which I thought I'd dealt with. The proposals that were brought forward were considered inadequate.
Okay, there's your answer.
Yep.
Councillor Durkin. Councillor Stark.
Yes. Thanks, Chair. Well, flows off screen, but I'll still say 98% of applications go through the normal delegated powers route. And we are a service, and we're meant to enable applicants to achieve what they want to achieve, subject to the provisions of the NPPF. Now, we've talked a lot today about pre-app, we've talked about communications with applicants and everything else. What we haven't talked about is the website, which I find very clunky and very difficult to navigate when it comes to planning matters. Now, I know there may be issues around the individual nature of certain applications, where it may be that the advice you can put on a website has to be couched in very general terms. But I'd like a recommendation from this committee that the website should be looked at and reviewed, because I think some of these questions that come up from applicants on their applications could be dealt with through online advice on the website. Bearing in mind we may have to caveat with it that it's subject to the individual nature of each application. But when you think 98% of applications go through members without us having to even think about redirection, because they're pretty non-controversial, they're pretty run-of-the-mill, they're generally full householder applications. I can't believe that we can't have more information on the website that might A, cut down on pre-app applications anyway, and B, lead to better applications, which again cuts down on the demands on the service. So that's a strong recommendation, is that we must ask someone to look at the website to see what, if anything, can be done to help with the process of the applicant in terms of that stage when they're trying to determine what they have to do and what they have to present to us. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Stark, I think that's an excellent suggestion, and it's front-loading the system so that it's smoother down the line. You've just triggered a thought in my mind that reminded me of something. Back in the good old days, back in the olden days, there used to be planning surgeries where members of the public could go in to see someone to talk through a planning issue and see a human being face to face, as it were. Now, obviously, given the size of the county and given the demand on everybody's time and travel, that may not be a possibility anymore. But we're having a face-to-face meeting where 5 or 6 people aren't even in the room. And there is this technology now where you can interact with people via mediums of Zoom and what have you. So, I would like at least there to be also exploring the possibility of planning surgery that may be virtual, maybe in a public building, but it's somewhere where the more you front load the experience, as Councillor Stark is saying, the less
the demand on
the demand is at the heavy end, where that's where all the hard work, is done sometimes when things aren't going according to plan or smooth. So, on top of that recommendation, I would like to see this idea of exploring the ideas of planning surgeries that, if not physical, could be virtual, just to sort some of the issues and perhaps help members of the public with this customer engagement. Councillor Harvey, you've got your hand up. Is that in response to this point? Sorry.
Sorry, Chairman, no it isn't. It's an old hand and I'm going to take it down.
All right. Okay, sorry, I just wanted to check. Didn't want to come in at that point. Right, so there's one recommendation which is inspired by Councillor Stark.
So we've got 2 recommendations.
Yes, exactly, but you just reminded me that was something I wanted to at least be considered. Right, I've got Councillor Summers.
Well, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to bring up the completion notices again. I just read an article on it, and you can't force completion, but really you can't, because it can encourage completion, but it can't force it, but it can revoke it. So it's something that we could possibly be using, the revoking part of it, because that's part of the issue. We have pit places standing around for years that have got planning permission on, but we can get it revoked. So it is possible, but thank you.
Okay. Councillor Wilding.
Thanks, Chair. I'll just bring up a couple of quick ones then. First one's about the local plan core strategy in terms of whether we're using existing policies and how we can increase those, make those existing policies more robust. Are we using the existing policies with sufficient robustness? Are we sufficiently adjusting the balance in terms of interpretation and application of the policies to meet the increasing prioritization of environmental stewardship and carbon reduction? Is the local plan really getting a hold of all those problems to do with trying to get to carbon zero sufficiently robustly enough? That's one. And the second one is the special planning documents that we've started to use, and bearing in mind that the SPDs for energy efficiency in buildings and drainage are now emerging. Can we get more SPDs in that might take the form of advice on sustainable transport, renewable energy and biodiversity and climate change? Thanks.
Okay, so there's quite a few things there from Councillor Wilding. I think Sharon wants to come back on a legal point, and then after we've heard from Sharon, if we can then go to Flo, who I think wants to address some of the points that Councillor Wilding has done. But all the while, Councillor Wilding, can you just think about, of all the points you've raised, which one of those are questions, and then which one of those are things you'd like as a recommendation? So first of all, Sharon.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, just to clarify the situation, sorry. As you quite rightly say, there are completion notices which are under the Town and Country Planning Act, section 94 to 95, that I can see, quick piece of legal research. And they do give local authorities the option to withdraw planning permissions for buildings if development is not completed within 12 months of a notice being issued. As I'm looking at the legal resources, they're very rarely used, Chair. The reason for that is because they can withdraw planning permission. So they're issued once development has commenced, and it can withdraw planning permission. But what it cannot do is compel you to complete that development. So that's just a point of clarification there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, that's helpful. And over to Flo.
Mute.
Yeah, thank you. Supplementary planning documents, rather than special planning documents, are documents that aim to show how we should implement local and national policy. They cannot set policy themselves. They can't make allocations. They are supplementary to the local plan. They don't form part of the development plan. However, we will be looking at the supplementary planning documents that we've got coming forward. As I say, we have got some coming forward, and we may well need to produce a supplementary planning document to illuminate how we're going to implement the requirements of the Environment Act, particularly with regard to biodiversity net gain and how developers have to prove their biodiversity net gain, and particularly with regard to local nature recovery strategies, which is something else that we're being required to do by the Environment Act. So it is something that we are keeping a very close review of.
Thank you for that. Can I just go back to Councillor Wilding, just for the benefit of Ben? Were there any of the points you were making?
Thanks. Yeah.
Which ones
Thanks,
would you like to see as recommendations?
Thanks, Chair. And thank you for correcting the special to supplementary. My mistake. That all sounds good. I wonder if I could just ask Flo. She probably knows the Environment Act inside out a lot better than I do. Does she think it's strong enough? Do we need to be pushing to make it even better, and does she think that we can exploit when that Environment Act comes in to be able to do the things we want to do to make planning better in a sustainable way? Thanks.
Through the Chair, I think the Environment Act will be a useful tool to us. Of course, we're awaiting the enabling legislation, so the rules and regulations that tell us how we implement it, and any lobbying that can be done to ensure that Parliament gets those enabling regulations through quickly is going to be useful. The Environment Act was a direct response to Brexit and no longer being able to rely on European law for environmental protection. The current government have, of course, said that they wish England to become an exemplar in the world on environmental protection legislation. And the Environment Act is the first setup from that. One of the other things the Environment Act does is it set up the Office for Environmental Protection as the government's quasi-independent legal watchdog on environmental matters. So I think the sooner that we provide training to members on the Environment Act, the implications of the Environment Act, the provisions within it, the additional duties that it imposes on local authorities, the sooner the better. Sorry.
In that case, Chair, that would be my recommendation, I suppose, that we make sure we've looked closely at that Environment Act and worked out exactly how we can exploit it to accomplish our planning needs.
Perhaps use it.
Use it to empower our services.
Get in there as quick as we can and really start exploiting it.
No.
Or perhaps
I think the word
empower the local authority to achieve objectives, perhaps. Right. I've got Councillor Durkin, then Councillor Stark.
Thank you, Chairman. Bearing in mind that which we've heard today and previously about the pressures within the planning service. I'm concerned with related to the mental well-being of the staff, both officers and senior officers, being understaffed and overworked, it would seem. What is in place, or is it still in place, to assist officers confidentially to help them with their mental well-being, and is it working effectively? Are we getting back some information that it is working effectively? Thank you, Chairman.
Question about staff wellbeing. There you go. Flo's got their hand up. Thank you.
Yes, there is an employee support programme which does work, which officers can self-refer to. And additionally, if we become aware that work-related stress is an issue, then we can refer staff to occupational health to get further support.
Okay, Councillor Durkin, you wanted to come back?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that, Flo. My question would be, is this service independent of the council? Because there are sometimes with occupational health, there's a perception, probably erroneous, that they are going to speak, and they are speaking to the management, as it were. So my follow-up question is, the service that's being provided for the mental health, is that independent of the council?
Yes, it is. And it's confidential as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, right, we've got Councillor Stark, Councillor Bowen and Councillor Summers, but I'm just wondering, would members like a 10-minute break? Because we've still got a few things to do, plus we've got recommendations to go through, or does everyone want to keep going?
Probably a break would do us good, I think, Mr. Chairman.
5 minutes.
Keep going for another.
I'll prefer a break, just for 5 minutes.
Okay, who wants a break, sorry?
5-minute break, I got a 2:30 meeting, so.
Okay, right, okay. Thank you. We've just had a short 10-minute break, and now we're going to resume with the scrutiny meeting, general scrutiny meeting, to discuss the planning service. Right, so to go back to the flow of the meeting, the next speaker was Councillor Stark.
Yes. Thank you, Chair. We've been talking about the Environment Bill and what we might have to do in terms of supplementary planning documents. But I'd like to remind everybody that we have conservation areas, we have AONBs, we have SSSIs and SACs. And I do find that even when we have these designations, I don't think we're doing enough to enforce some of the contraventions of them that are happening. I mean, I've had a few examples where trees and other greenery has been cut down in conservation areas without planning permission. So I'm not asking for a debate on this, but I think there should be a recommendation that we utilise those existing designations to make sure that we do enforce them as fully as possible without having to rely on the Environment Bill to stiffen our resolve, as it were. So that is a recommendation, because I don't think we're doing enough to enforce the contraventions that are happening at the moment in existing designated areas such as conservation areas. Thank you, Chair.
So a recommendation would be something along the lines of a review of how various safeguards and various designations.
Making best use of our legislation.
How well we are using current regulations and restrictions to ensure we protect the environment. Yeah. Well, what I should have said is, can I just have any specific questions about 106? We didn't have the presentation, but we had our officer Justine here. Has anybody got any more specific 106 questions? Councillor Stark.
There's been an issue amongst the three of us and Ross, that's myself, Councillor Barton, Councillor Simons, about how much we get involved in the heads of terms agreements that are discussed between officers and developers. That is something that has concerned us. Now, I know we've been told that those arrangements are under review at the moment, but I think there's an issue around how much the council engages ward members when it comes to S106. I'm not just talking about asking parish councils for their wish list. I know that does happen, but we feel that we have local concerns and local understanding that we would like to be brought into the heads of terms of discussions, but often they happen in a confidential way, and sometimes we're not sure why we've ended up with the contribution split that we've ended up with. So I'm not sure we need a debate in that. I think that could just be another recommendation that we should ensure that ward members are fully involved as much as possible when the heads of terms agreements have been drawn up.
Okay, recommendation there. Yeah, I think that's good. But I'm conscious of officer time, so if there's no presentation because we've covered 106, then Justine, I don't know if you wish to leave the meeting or stay on, but by all means, I think we've drawn a line under the 106 points to be made, unless Councillor Summers is going to tell me something different.
Yeah, I'd just like to go a step further with the ward members, and I think you already know my feelings on it anyway, but I think all ward members should get a quarterly report of their patch of what's available in each parish, rather than have to go chasing it. And then they have, we're pretty busy, especially when we have 5 parishes or more. So if we had that information come through to us about what's available for each parish, it would be a great help. I've been asking for this for some time, but now we have somebody on the job. I think maybe we'll ask for it again. Thank you.
Good. Councillor Harvey, you've got a hand up. Would you like to come in at this point?
Yeah, just to say, I've already asked for the information which is presented on the council's website about section 106, which came on stream in the autumn last year, to be improved and broadened so that there's more information visible than the funds that have already been received by developers, which are interesting to know, but I think it's helpful to be able to see the full sum of money that can be expected to flow over time as a development gets built out, and what the projects are that have already been agreed and signed up to as being paid for by those sums of money where those have been stipulated in the heads of terms agreements. I've also asked it, Flo showed in the presentation that she gave that there's a number of training events that are already being planned, one of which in April is going to be, I think, on section 106. And I've asked for the end-to-end approach to that to be included so that there's clarity on where members, where parishes and where members of the public can influence at appropriate points in the process.
Okay, I think that would be useful.
Hopefully that will tick the box. But if when the training comes it doesn't satisfy, then we're happy to go around the boy on it.
Okay, thank you. Right, I've got Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just part of my recommendation also, if Sharon could be good enough to add information and explanation in a clear and concise way on completion orders and allied documents. Thank you.
Right, Councillor Stark.
It's while we're on recommendations, I gave a recommendation prior to the meeting on redirection where I asked for consideration to be given for a stronger role for elected members in the redirection process, because I think I feel sometimes I'm really at arm's length to it. So the recommendation is to provide for a stronger role in terms of the process being determined. so that the elected member does feel that they are engaged. And not only that, so that when residents come to us, we can actually show that we are actually taking their concerns seriously when it comes to controversial applications. Thank you, Chair. I was just reminded by Ben that I should remind the committee of that.
Thank you. Right. Can I ask Ben how many recommendations we've got? I know it's not a numbers game, but just to give an idea of how much we've just got to go through and agree to see that we encapsulate.
I've tried to incorporate a couple into a single recommendation here and there, but I think we're up to S at the moment.
Okay, that's quite a.
How many?
S.
Quite a few. Right. Have we got any more questions that we want to raise in terms of asking the planning process now? Bearing in mind, I can see Councillor Wilding's hand's gone up, but bearing in mind we also want, as part of the scrutiny function, to welcome the planning inspectorate, because as we all know, the planning inspectorate plays another critical role in the planning process. So there'll be a further meeting planned there. But Councillor Wilding.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to follow on from what Councillor Stark was saying about the fact that we've got these other agencies like the AONB and stuff, and we should, be making sure we follow up on whatever possibilities we have with them in terms of planning. And I just wanted to say that I think the core strategy as is, there it is, sort of hidden in my thing. I've got it here. And the biggest thing within the current core strategy is the word of sustainability. And I'd like to see us look at that word and start interpreting it in a more robust way. And if we do that, we already have within the current core strategy massive things that can help us look at the climate and ecological emergency. The biggest, I suppose, is that under sustainable development, it quotes that thing about it meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations. And the more we look at climate change and the way it's going to affect future generations, the more it seems to me that the word sustainable development needs to be interpreted in a harder way, so that we do make sure applications and developments at the moment do address the climate change. So I'd like to see a recommendation that we look at the words and the use of sustainability and give it more oomph. I'm not sure exactly how it should be phrased, but give it more strength and more teeth and more oomph, so that because we already have it running right through the core strategy at the moment, and I don't believe in the time I've been on the council it's actually been interpreted strongly enough. Thank you.
Flo, did you want to come back on that one?
If I may, what was quite interesting, when the NPPF was first published in 2012, they had the government referred to as a golden thread running through it about sustainable development. And when the planning profession turned to the government and said, can you provide us with the definition of sustainable development? They said, and I'm paraphrasing here, it's paragraphs 1 to 284 of the National Planning Policy Framework. In other words, they didn't have a definition. We have been promised a definition of sustainable development as part of the enabling regulations surrounding the Environment Act. And once we have a definition, then that enables us to enforce more strongly. The issue we have with the current core strategy, as opposed to the new emerging local plan, is the current core strategy was produced under a different national planning policy framework and not the one that we're working to at the moment. The current core strategy is not in alignment with the Environment Act and is not in alignment with the recent changes to the NPPF, which is why we're looking to review and produce a new local plan.
Okay, so Councillor Wilding, in answer to your question, we're waiting for a definition.
Okay, it's just that in the core strategy, it looks like it has given a definition, which is taken, I think, from the United Nations definition. It seems like it's in there, but I do take what Flo Church was saying, and yet again, we're waiting for something to be passed on from above. Thanks.
If I just may make a brief comment, the definition that Councillor Wilding's referring to about not compromising the ability of future generations, that's known as the Brundtland definition, and that's a definition that emerged out of the European Parliament probably 30 years ago now. So it's, you know, professionally, it's going to be very interesting to see what definition the government comes up with sustainable development. And also bear in mind, wherever there is a definition, there is then the ability for developers to argue against that. So we just need to bear that in mind.
So what we're saying is we need a sustainable definition of what sustainable is, that will last the test of time and be able to be deployed by policy and decision making.
So it is what passes the test of time.
Absolutely.
Okay, right. Councillor Summers and then Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if I can get this out properly, but we'll try. It's about well-being, basically, and in planning, there's been quite a few of them come to committee about, you know, carers, parents or children moving in close to the family or building close to the family so they can take care of their family. It's quite difficult, quite often, to get for them to get planning permission because we don't look at health and well-being as we're supposed to. We don't very often look at it as part of the planning process, which. Now, we're looking more and more of keeping people in their own homes, which, but when we look at planning applications that don't allow that, it makes it more difficult. So I just wonder, Flo, if you understand what I'm saying, because I don't, if we're at least working on that now. I know I've brought it to the attention of planning quite often that we need to be looking at it because caring for our elderly parents, etc., is a must, and quite often we have to have a separate home. So is it being looked at? Can you tell me? Thanks.
So, certainly through the chair. I mean, well-being, and please don't shoot the messenger here, well-being is not a material planning consideration, and it is material planning considerations that you are basing your determination of applications on. As well as material considerations, you also have other considerations, and well-being would be an other consideration. You have to base your determination on material considerations unless other things, unless things indicate otherwise. So the National Planning Policy Framework indicates you should make a different decision. So it is a very difficult position. Generally speaking, the personal circumstances of applicants are not material considerations in the determination of planning applications and not something that you as members or us as officers can take into account when we're coming to recommendations. I don't know how we get over that.
Well, can I suggest, though, on that point, because this is an issue that I've experienced in my ward, that this is the general comment you will get from members of the public. You know, a housing estate gets approved and officers welcome it, whereas one person, as Councillor Summers said, one person trying to care for their older relative and make their own arrangements and go to their own expense to provide ancillary accommodation for them on their own land within the curtilage of their own property, there seems to be a reluctance to accept that as a solution. And I can speak of personal experience of where that has happened in the ward I represent. So members of the public quite naturally think, well, hang on a second, you can allow a housing estate, but where I want to take matters into my own hands and release the council from the burden of providing social care, because we can create our own family network of social care. The planning system seems to prejudice against that scenario. And I take your point about it not being a material consideration, but are we gearing up our future policies to ensure that where a solution presents itself in terms of family accommodation or caring for your carer's needs, the person you're caring for, can the planning system reflect that opportunity? Because that's exactly what it is. It is an opportunity if the planners will allow it. But are we going into it with the right mindset on that particular issue? Because the cost of looking after residents when they have to go into care, as we all know, is one of the huge burdens for the council.
Can I comment?
Financial burden for the council, I have to say.
Yeah. If I could make one observation here, when you give planning permission for, say, an annex or a standalone dwelling, generally you can't oblige that person to keep that in the family. You can put a condition on saying mustn't be occupied independently of the main dwelling. That's the way that you can control things. But then, say circumstances change, and as I'm sure we all know, unfortunately, relatives do die. The caring concerns then are lessened. There is nothing that we can. There's not nothing. We need to be careful about imposing conditions that then don't allow people to perhaps sell on that additional dwelling. It's a very fine balance that we have to come to in the decision making.
Noted. Sorry, Councillor Summers, did you want to come back?
Yeah, can I just come back? Quite often, those other homes are small, maybe 2 bedrooms, and we do need 2-bedroom homes. So if it's in a village and it's putting an extra property into that village that might be available later for a younger person with a lower income or something, then perhaps we should be looking at that also. At the moment, we're not. We're just saying they might sell it on. That's what I hear a lot of. We might sell it on, and you hear it in committees, etc. You might sell it on, but I think we're taking that one a bit too far sometimes. Yes, it might be sold on, but again, it's still a property that might be available for someone that in the future, and I don't think we should be looking at selling on quite as much as we do. Thank you. Anyway, thanks.
Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, I agree with both of those points raised. Now, was one of your comments earlier, could we lobby government on enabling the regulations for the Environment Act? Would that be something that you would like us to do?
I think what I was saying there was it would be useful if members were to lobby the government to get a move on in getting these enabling regulations on the books.
Great, then we'll make that a recommendation, hopefully. Thank you.
There we go. We want our regs as soon as possible. Now, please. Right, Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just an example of what can happen if you give particular permissions for someone you think is disabled or otherwise disadvantaged. It happened in my ward. Some brothers one of their brothers was blind. They asked for a house specially for him in a new house in the open countryside and all that sort of stuff. Yes, poor chap, he needs all the help we can give him. House was built, quite a big house. Within 6 months it was sold in the open market for a very large sum. So you could be very careful what you do and how you do it. It's a very difficult position, I know, but it is all too easy to exploit these not to the benefit of the general public, as you might say. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, Chloe, just put your hand up.
Yeah, it's just a comment to say the other thing that we need to be aware of is the potential for creating a lot of holiday homes, second homes, in allowing these smaller units and not conditioning them appropriately, sufficiently strong enough to keep them to the original intended use.
I'm going to go after this one.
Oh, sorry. Councillor Summers, please.
Yeah, I really have to go at this one because I've got 3 places in my ward at least that they built a house on property which is like the back garden. One is in the back garden, another one was where they had a small business before. There's no room, no parking, but we approved them. So I think that might be lost somewhere along the line if we're allowing people to build next to each other within 2 feet, but we're not allowing someone to help someone else that even if it might be sold later. I don't know. There's something wrong somewhere. Thanks. Anyway, enough.
Okay, right, we'll move on. Can we, well, first of all, I know... I know that the director's been busily listening and has made some notes, but would like to make a few comments. So if we can go to Ross Cook, and then I would quite like to get us to look at the recommendations so that we can make some formal decisions. Thank you. Over to Ross.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, members, for all your contributions and comments today. It's really been helpful for me, as I said, fairly new at the post, and so it's really timely for me to hear some of the concerns that you've got. Can I firstly just go back to some of the points that have been made throughout about just thanking the staff who are still working tirelessly within the team. I think we all probably saw it during lockdown where not us personally, but others would take out frustrations on those staff that were able to go into working shops or whatever. And I think sometimes it's a bit like that situation here where the staff who are still here working tirelessly, with limited resources around them, are the ones that take the brunt of the frustrations. So I do appreciate your comments and support for that as well. And I'd like to thank them personally. Linked to that, of course, is around my own review of the resources and the structure of the service, both within planning but across the whole directorate. And clearly that's part of what I'm going to be picking up in the coming weeks and months. Flo mentioned a couple of services such as ecology and conservation and whether they sit in the right area. Again, that's a really good time for me to review that and just make sure that we've got the right teams in the right places. Having said that, I think there's also that element of making sure our processes are right, both in terms of external and internal consultation, because quite often some of these issues that you're challenging around is that delay in that part of the process. So we need to make sure, firstly, internally, that our consultees are responding in a timely manner, and equally the external ones as well. We've recently had some advice from our legal colleagues around whether we can carry on if somebody hasn't responded within their 21 days, and clearly there's a risk to that. So it's something we need to be mindful of. But for me, again, that's where some of that failure demand keeps coming back, because the residents or the applicants or even yourselves or the parish councils, you're coming back to say, where are we on this? And if we haven't had the responses back from those consultees, that's causing more of the failure demand, which is then increasing the number of calls, which then it just perpetuates the problem. So I really want to understand that and to see how we can improve that. And again, that links to that communication, which you've all said many, many times today, around communicating with yourselves, with the neighbours, with the applicants, with the parish councils. There must be a way of improving that. And again, the pressure that goes back onto the professional officers are those times where they're trying to get back to you or anyone else saying what's going on. And again, I've not had a chance to look at the team yet, but just at least looking at how we can free them up to carry on doing what they're doing, and perhaps support some sort of support team or some way of making sure that the communication's improved, so there is somebody who can respond to you and respond to phone calls in a timely manner, and the professional planning officers can carry on and do what they're doing. So certainly part of what I want to review. Again, there's been quite a lot of conversations and comments around the powers that we've got, and again, it's really good that Flo's mentioned some of the planning that's coming up, some of the training that's coming up for both members and for officers, just to even remind ourselves what we can and can't do. What are those powers? Where can we do enforcement? What enforcement do we do? And I think another workshop sort of session around those issues would be really, really helpful. And again, you've mentioned a few times the information on the website, making sure that actually people can access that information in a timely way. The idea of surgeries, again, just for people to get a rough idea of what do I do, how do I do it. I guess I'd balance that one with that pre-application traded services to make sure that where do you draw the line to say we can advise you up to this point, and now we want to go down a pre-application route. But we could still sift out quite a few of those sort of initial comments and queries that come in. And that was one of the final things really around that pre-application service, but also just thinking about the fee structure and how we sort of promote the service and what we're doing. And again, I'm sure many of your recommendations will come back to those points. So appreciate all your time and your comments, and I do know it's one of those services along probably potholes that probably fills your inbox on a daily basis, and we do appreciate the pressure that puts on you as ward members to try and deal with things in a timely manner. So appreciate all your comments today.
Thank you, Ross, and I think it's very important that it is noted that planning can be an extremely difficult job to do, just bottom line, whether you're approving something or refusing something or liaising with anyone. It's an extremely complicated and difficult job, and I think given that the pressures that officers have been under over the last couple of years, it must be noted, and I'd like it noted from this planning committee that, this scrutiny committee, that it is a difficult job, and we appreciate all of the hard work that officers do, and have had to do with high caseloads. Right, so I'd like to focus members' attention on the recommendations that we've got, and as to be expected, we have a few, but if I can ask Ben to take us through them.
Yes, Chair, just before we do that, can we, would you mind passing a resolution, perhaps if you're minded to do so, to extend the meeting beyond 3 hours, just for the record? Thank you.
Yes, can I extend the meeting beyond 3 hours, and can I second Councillor Durkin, all in agreement? Thank you.
Thank you. Bear with me, I'll just move recommendations on screen, thank you. So this is obviously just draft recommendations picked up during the course of the discussion, which obviously might need to be refined as we go along or subsequent to the meeting. But A is a detailed report on the historic handling and recommended future management of the entire Section 106 process be brought back to the relevant scrutiny committee within 3 months. B, information about the cost of the additional resources brought in to address the planning backlog be circulated to committee members.
Possibly to all councillors.
All councillors?
It affects us all.
Yep, can we just amend
We'll
that?
amend that, of course, thank you.
Yep.
Chair, can I just add all additional resources?
All resources, yeah, all.
Okay, if it's okay, I'll pick the amendments out of the meeting just so we can flow through. The next one, C, further consideration be given to the capacity of the planning service to meet demand, including the range and level of applications being received. D, information be circulated about the quality assurance process and the measures to ensure consistency in the production of planning reports, including the appropriateness, robustness and enforceability of conditions.
It's not just reports, it's decisions as well, Chair. It's more than just the report itself, it's the actual decision as well.
The production of planning reports, consistent production of planning reports, and in terms of decision making.
And decisions, yeah, and decisions.
Yeah.
Just add decisions in there.
Thank you. E, a detailed response be provided about the staffing and recruitment challenges, including the reasons why business cases were not received from the service.
All happy?
Okay. F, options to deliver enforcement action more effectively and efficiently across planning and other service areas be considered. The development of a local protocol charter for communication between members and officers be supported. I've just added that another combining other recommendations, particularly to improve understanding of the role of local ward members and their communities. H, the update of the core strategy includes a community infrastructure delivery plan. I, opportunities to be explored to improve public understanding of planning regulations and the planning system, with particular attention given to the content on the Council's website and to the potential for planning surgeries, perhaps utilising a virtual meeting platform. J, in view of the aspirations of the improvement plan, assurance be provided there are sufficient resources in place to achieve it. I'm mindful that Flo's got a hand up, but shall I just carry on through the recommendations first, that we've got them all?
Flo, can I ask, is it in relation to one specific recommendation?
Yes, it is. It's in recommendation H. Can we refer to it as the local plan, because that differentiates between the existing core strategy and the emerging local plan, and it should reference an infrastructure delivery plan. There isn't such a thing as a community infrastructure delivery plan. So it's just in terms of getting the terminology right. I think
absolutely. Noted. Thank you.
Most helpful, thank you. So moving on to K, a letter be sent to government to highlight the increasing pressures in the Children's and Adults Directorate and the need for adequate funding to ensure that economy and environment services are not impacted disproportionately.
Yes.
L, a review be undertaken of the pre-application advice service, including consideration of charging and value for money, the effectiveness of the service and how it meets the expectations of stakeholders.
That misses the point that what we're trying to get here is a service that enables the applications to actually go through in the way that they should go through. So it's not just about meeting expectations of stakeholders, it's about ensuring that the process works, to be honest, fundamentally works.
Well, it does say in the recommendation the effectiveness of the service. So it's a review of that.
Yes, okay, it's very general, okay, fair enough. As long as you don't miss that point.
No, absolutely.
Fundamentally, it's about enabling the planning service to deliver what we are meant to deliver statutorily.
Well, the effectiveness of the service to achieve preferred outcomes.
Yes.
Something like that.
Yes.
Yeah. Because if it's not adding value to the process, then
No, it's not worth, no.
it's not worth it.
Then M, a review be undertaken of the challenges associated with untidy land at derelict sites, particularly in terms of expediting action and bringing forward appropriate development where possible.
Yep.
N, that councillors be provided with an overview of the key legal orders, such as those made under Section 106 and Section 215 of the Town and Country Planning Act.
I think also it needs a little clarification on that too, if I may say, Mr. Chairman. That not only a review of the challenges, but also we need to have clear and concise explanations of what we can and can't do, really, I think. And a sensible and sound look at what these various orders actually mean. And the limits of what can be done too.
A jargon busting advice document.
Absolutely. Well done, Mr. Chairman.
To equip members with knowing what's in the toolkit.
Yeah, I think so. In simple terms and the limits and practicalities of it all.
Yes, I think that the issue is sometimes these phrases, sections are banded around at meetings, but if there isn't a go-to document that members can have under their arm when they go into a meeting.
We basically need a glossary, don't we?
Something like that, yeah. So where have we encapsulated? Have we encapsulated that?
Well, in terms of an overview, but we can expand that to include a glossary of the key terms and powers that are available.
Okay.
The Environment Act we looked at closely in order to empower the council services and government be encouraged to progress the enabling regulations. P, a review be undertaken of how current regulations and restrictions are being utilised in order to protect the environment and following Councillor Wilding's points and to enable the council to respond to the climate and ecological emergency. Q, local members are involved more actively in the preparation of heads of terms planning obligations.
Yeah.
The Rethinking Governance Working Group be invited to give further consideration to a stronger role for the local ward member in the redirection procedure. And S, that clarification be provided about what customers can expect in terms of communication liaison from the planning service, including the frequency and timeliness of responses.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Ben, for there's a lot there to have...
There's a lot there, Ben, well done.
Yeah, not there to have encapsulated, but is there anything else that we can think of? Speak now or forever hold your peace. I think we're going to go on to the work programme and we're going to have this further promised meeting with the Planning Inspectorate. So my suggestion would be if there's anything over a period of reflection that we think we've missed, we revisit, or the appropriate scrutiny committee revisit the planning service. I don't think we were ever going to knock everything on the head today in terms of what we could come up with in terms of further recommendations, but I think we've given it a good go with this list and a lot to go on. So, bearing in mind, Councillor Wilding, you can't vote on this item. I take it though that you're pretty much in favour of all of those recommendations, and there's a thumbs up, physical thumbs up in virtual space, so thank you. Right, so I think if I can propose those recommendations from the Chair, can I have a second, Councillor Bowes, and for those of you who can vote, all in favour? Excellent. Well, thank you to Councillor Harvey and to officers. Flo, you've answered a lot of questions for us. and thanks to all the other officers contributing to this item. Everybody has a vested interest in getting the planning service working in the way that everybody wants it to, so I think hopefully we've added some value there to addressing some of the challenges and trying to put forward some recommendations for improvements. Okay, we now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the work programme. As I've just said, that there was the opportunity being offered to the council for somebody from the planning inspectorate to come and talk to a scrutiny committee, and so I would suggest that that meeting happens as soon as it can, so that we're this topic is still in our minds. We also have the fact that the decision coming forward to reshape the scrutiny committee function will come to us in council in May. So as to what committee deals with what issue is something that will be hammered out. But is there any recommendations that this committee would like to put forward for anything that the reconstituted committees should be focusing on? Or should we just hold dry until...
Yeah, well, the only thing I don't quite understand is where general scrutiny fits in the new pattern. It's not mentioned, is it? So are we changing names?
Chair, if I may, the scrutiny committees are sort of getting are changing the process. I mean, which will have a scrutiny management board, kind of looking at some of the broader overarching and opportunities for joint working between those committees.
But general scrutiny isn't.
General scrutiny doesn't form part of that, but Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee continues as it is.
Yes.
Certain general scrutiny functions are likely to be within the remit of the Scrutiny Management Board, but also the Connected Communities Scrutiny Committees. That will include planning going forward, but also there'll be an Environmental Sustainability Scrutiny Committee as well. So yeah, I think that's recognising members' responses to scrutiny in recent times to elevate that particular element of it. So indeed, so there won't be a general scrutiny committee from May onwards.
No.
But obviously, council will have the opportunity to appoint chairs and vice chairs and work out exactly how the operation of those committees will work going forward. So elements of the general scrutiny work programme at the moment, clearly that limits our opportunity to progress much of that before those changes come into play. Clearly, we can either explore at this meeting or a subsequent informal discussion about those elements that you wish to recommend perhaps as priority areas. But clearly it'd still be up to those committees to determine their own work programmes.
Yeah, but the work we're doing today, for example, in May, that won't make any difference. It'll still be out there in the ether, but as far as we as a committee, we won't exist anymore. We'll be moved to different other places. So the General Scrutiny Committee as it is today will not exist. Okay, so the work we've been doing, we have to, decide where that is going to go in the concept of the new system.
Yes, and I think what Ben's suggesting is that perhaps if this scrutiny committee has a meeting just to say of all the things that were in our work programme, what would be the key topics that we would hope that would be picked up by the new committee system pretty much hot off the press. And I think we've started something here with the momentum talking about planning. We've acknowledged that we haven't touched on all aspects of planning, and so I think probably one of the recommendations I can foresee coming from this group will be, keep going with planning and discuss the other elements of it that we haven't been able to touch on today. So if members are in agreement, we can have our informal meeting just to list what those key items for us should be to hand over to the new committee system.
Can we do that virtually?
Absolutely, yes. It wouldn't be a meeting where we needed to make a formal decision, but it would be us listing our recommendations for what the new committee system should be looking at in the near future, and then obviously it'll be up to them to decide moving forward. So if that's how we can leave the work programme arrangements, then are there any other items that we just need to draw any attention to with regards to the work programme? If not, as I say, I would look, Councillor Lowe.
Matters pertaining to the delivery of Fastershire, has that been properly addressed yet, do you think?
It was a recommend, if I may, Chair, sorry, it was a recommendation from Audit and Governance Committee at the start of the year. I understand that work is ongoing on that. And certainly what we could do is bring a couple of officers to that informal discussion to explain where things are with the things that are outstanding on the work programme, to give you assurance about where we are and any recommendations you want to then make to the future committees.
I think I think, Mr. Chairman, that is actually important, because we rest so much upon Fastershire working efficiently, and there are considerable swathes of the county where Fastershire is hopeless, or non-existent even. So I think it's rather vital we get that matter addressed.
Okay, as I say, if there are topics that we really feel passionate about and want them addressed by the new committee's system to start off with, then that will be the purpose of the meeting, to try and make sure we've got that list to hand over.
Yeah. So go on.
TV's gone off.
Okay, right. If there are no other points to make on that matter, then I'd like to draw this meeting to a close, and just to thank the committee for all their hard work this morning and afternoon. Thank you very much. Thank you. If I can just ask that the live feed is now stopped.
Stop by itself. Stop by itself.